Okay, good afternoon everyone and welcome to this hybrid meeting of Angus Council Scrutiny and Audit Committee. I would remind you all, as usual, that this meeting has been recorded and webcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. I have agreed the attendance of some members remotely and would remind all remote attendees to mute their microphones when not speaking. Thank you. Members and our partner friends here, just before we start the official business, one of our directors, Vivian Smith, is retiring after 37 years in local government next Friday. And it's exactly, I believe, and Mrs Williamson will keep me right here, 37 years to the day since she started her career in local government after a short spell in nursing. So I would just like to take, it's been a pleasure to work with Vivian if she's watching online, and I would just like to take this opportunity on behalf of this committee to wish her a very long, happy and healthy retirement, and hopefully we'll see you about, Vivian, if you're listening. Does anyone else wish to say anything? Okay, well done. Yeah, okay, absolutely. Thank you very much. Mrs Whittaker, are there any apologies or substitutions, please?
I have no apologies, Convener. I have everyone present, both either in person or remotely. Okay,
thank you. Any declarations of interest and statements of transparency? No. Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 3, minute of the previous meeting. We're asked to submit for approval as a correct record at the meeting of this committee of the 15th of June 2023. Do we agree that as a correct record?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. And the first item of business, welcome again to our Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and police colleagues, and it's their report by their local senior officer, their quarterly report, the 1st of April 2023 to the 30th of June 23. And as usual, there may be questions and comments after. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, good afternoon, everyone. Here today to get scrutinised on our Q1 performance, so look forward to any questions you may have. Mark's here to present the detail of the report on my behalf. Just a quick couple of points for myself. You will be aware that our local plan has been under review for some time. It's currently been delayed and is getting escalated to our board level. The reasons and rationale why. Can I just ask for your continued support whilst we work through that, because we're really keen to bring a high quality report that's focused on the Angus area. One area pulling out that Mark will talk about is our unwanted fire signals. They do remain high, and you'll remember that we've recently changed our policy in that regard, which may come out through the report. However, remember Q1 still captures the high activity in there. We'd expect Q2 to start to show some improvement with us not attending certain calls that don't have life risk, etc. Just a reminder on that policy, the changes doesn't affect any premises that has sleeping premises, such as hospitals and care homes, hotels and any domestic premises. Like I say, we've had a few queries in from elected members. Happy to have any off-table discussions with you and really be clear on what the policy changes are and what impact that may be on your constituents. A bit of information that's came to my hand just after the report was written was it's not significant, but it's really important to us. We're working in partnership with Scottish Gas Networks, and they've been supplying us with carbon monoxide detection and as well as hard of hearing alarms. I think it's a really great example that we're taking across the whole of Tayside, but in particular within Angus, for us to focus on vulnerable people in that regard. The other area of the report that caught my eye was the young workforce employability programme. We've seen that flourish in other areas to be a multi-agency approach that we work in conjunction with other partners. We'd love to see that kind of flourish in this area as well, even more than it is. So that's me use the same word twice, but I must like it today. So on that note, I'll just hand over to Mark to continue giving some detail on the report. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you. If I could take the membership straight to page 20 of the combined meeting report, and I'll talk through each of the headline indicators. Q1 has seen Angus stations attend 361 incidents. Again, going to page 22 and 23 for accidental dwelling fires. There were 12 accidental dwelling fires during Q1, which is below the 3-year average for the quarter. The majority were classed as low severity, with 8 of the 12 starting in the kitchen and being contained within that compartment. Those are mainly down to faulty electrical appliances, cooking and careless handling of. There was no EDF fatal casualties and there was 0 non-fatal casualties during this period. And again, Angus crews carried out 211 home fire safety visits, of which 104 were designated as a high risk. Going on to pages 24 and 25, for non-domestic building fires, there was 1 incident with non-domestic properties, which is well below the average for the quarter. During Q1, the Angus Fire Safety Enforcement Officer carried out 30 visits to relevant premises, and all 4 large sports grounds received a visit with Angus Council colleagues to support the issuing of a safety certificate. Again, within this, there were 0 fatal and 0 non-fatal casualties within non-domestic premises. Moving on quickly to pages 26 and 27, RTCs showing green. There were 12 incidents in Q1, which is above the 3-year average. There's no obvious trends in location. 5 RTCs occurred in the urban settings, 2 on the A90 and the remaining 5 on rural roads. Again, headline indicator 8 and 9, unfortunately, these are both red, with RTC fatal casualties. Unfortunately, there was a single fatal RTC casualty within this reporting period, and this was in the Arbroath town area. Headline indicator 9, again showing red. Within Q1, we've had 12 RTC casualties from 6 of the 12 RTCs. If I can just put a bit of clarity on that, 7 casualties occurred from 2 RTCs on the A90, with 5 of those casualties coming from 1 incident at Petterdene. There's no obvious trends in location, time of day, or where or when the RTCs occurred. Pages 28 and 29, headline indicator for UFAS, again showing green. Within Q1 reporting period, there was 84 UFAS incidents in Angus, which is slightly above the 3-year average of 77. The highest number, again as normal, comes from education establishments, where there was 16. There was 11 from residential care homes for the elderly, 8 from industrial and manufacturing, and 7 from residential care homes for the young. So moving forward, if this quarter had seen the introduction of the UFAS new response model, we would have attended 32 of the 84 incidents. Again, with 10 of the 11 appliances in Angus being on call, this would reduce the burden on local businesses who release their on-call firefighters to attend this incident type, and it would also drastically reduce the road risk from appliances during blue light journeys to these incidents. Page 30 and 31, headline indicator 11 and 12. Deliberate primary fires showing green. Within Q1, there were 7 deliberate primary fires, which is below the 3-year average. 3 of the 7 incidents were grassland and woodland. There was a domestic garage in Carnoustie, rubbish on fire in the bandstand at Reid Park, Forfar. There was a van on fire after being stolen again in Forfar, and a bin store in Montrose. All these incidents occurred between 1900 hours and 0400 hours. Again, for deliberate secondary fires, showing amber for this. Again, the numbers are fairly high. We've seen 30 incidents across Angus, with the highest numbers being in and around the Arbroath area with 7 incidents. The majority, 24 of secondary fires, as expected, occurred between the schools closing and midnight. If I can take you on now to page 33 and 34 of the meeting pack. This provides an insight into the work carried out by the very proactive community action team across Angus. Some of the support provided includes 12 hard of hearing alarms fitted, 41 home fire safety visits to support the crews across Angus. Again, we're working closely with Angus Adult Protection, providing several presentations for a partnership approach to hoarding and self-neglect. 15 adult protection forms were submitted to Angus Council Social Work over this period. The Angus Local Authority Liaison Officer and Community Safety Advocates attended 6 virtual multi-agency case conferences involved persons identified as vulnerable and at risk, and 2 sash jammers were fitted to letterbox at vulnerable residents' properties. Moving on to 35 to 39, Appendix 2. Notable events. There's a number of notable events, but I'll just cover 1 or 2 and I'll happily take any questions on the others. First one being Exercise Thomas, which was a large multi-agency exercise testing all partners' response to a marauding terrorist attack on a train stopped in a train station. Partners from all agencies attended, took full benefit from the extensively arranged exercise. Fire service crews were able to support Scottish Ambulance Service colleagues in casualty recovery, along with practice heavy lifting techniques to free casualties from under-rail carriages. East Haven Local Resilience Partnership exercise. Crews from Carnoustie and Arbroath carried out an exercise with members from the East Haven LRP to test the partnership working between both agencies should we need to attend an incident beyond the rail line. Crews utilised the off-road vehicle provided by East Haven LRP to support the movement of both personnel and equipment. Moving on to the community initiatives. Local food banks and clothing initiative. Angus crews continue to support both the food and clothing banks to support the local communities. These have now become embedded into a number of stations where it has been identified that the support is required. I would like to just highlight my thanks to all the stations and personnel involved in this very worthy and notable cause. Rossy Secure Trust, the Fire Skills Programme. May saw the Angus community team complete another successful corporate parenting venture with Rossy School. This venture has gone from strength to strength since its inception in 2020. This time, 7 residents participated in the event, with 2 individuals returning from the last course as mentors to the 7. And again, just as Jason mentioned earlier on, developing the Young Workforce Employability and Workforce Programme. 12 students took part in this Fire Skills Work Placement Programme, along with developing Young Workforce team. This was held at Forfar Fire Station. The skills included being interviewed, where the students provided a presentation on their knowledge and understanding of the Fire and Rescue Service in a formal setting to provide interview skills and experience in a realistic environment. The students then attended a week's practical course at Forfar Community Fire Station, where they learned the practical side of the Fire and Rescue Service. And this then led to 4 students who were selected to attend a work placement week with the Angus Community Action Team, where they learned about the community engagement side of the Fire and Rescue Service. Thank you, Chair. I'll happily take any questions from there.
Thank you very much. Are there any? Councillor Bell and then Councillor Devine. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. I have 3 questions, actually. Do you mind if I fire them out quickly in one go, or one at a time? No, one at a... Whatever. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for your report. My first question is the end of page 29, where you're talking about the time for change incidents, and I just wondered, has there been any scope for follow-up with those 52 call-outs to pick up on the theme there, and which settings were the main source of those? That's my first question. And on page 31, around the grassland, vegetation and scrubland fires, at any time in those incidents, are the people who either accidentally or deliberately were involved in that fire, have you been able to engage with them? Have they resulted in any charges? And on page 35, I was really interested to see the Be Careful Where You Park campaign. I've got a couple of villages in my ward where inconsiderate parking is causing problems, not just for emergency vehicles, but for everybody, really. And I wondered if there's any leaflets or anything that could be used as a letterbox drop. I would happily do that myself in order to save your guys' time, because I know where the issues are. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. So if I can take these on individually. The UFAS, our fire safety enforcement continually goes out and businesses and duty holders and looking at all different options to prevent reoccurrences of this type of event. Again, probably looking at it, the main offenders are our education establishments and have been for a considerable time, residential care homes, industrial manufacture, and 1 or 2 well-known premises that we continue to work with. But these Again, it's out for duty holders to reach out now, where we're not attending these particular premises, and the support is there, but they also have to look for support from their own fire risk assessment teams, and again on ways to reduce that type of scenario. Going to grassland incidents, these are particularly tricky for ourselves in Police Scotland, not to deal with, but it's to capture those that are involved in it. Accidental, there's no issues with these. Everybody has accidents. We don't have a problem with that. But those that are more maliciously or deliberately set are more difficult to catch. We do a lot of input in schools in particular problematic areas. We had a problem in Forfar recently where we put the community action team again into the local schools just to reiterate the problems with these types of things, and if they take us away from real emergencies. So again, we've tried to reiterate that in the schools. And the final question was, I've forgotten, could you remind me, please? Parking. And considerate parking, yes. This is an initiative we've done up in Kirriemuir, again through the local fire station and Police Scotland support. There is plenty of leaflets. I'm happy to get them to you, and we're also happy that if you can provide us with some information, we're happy to get teams to go out and we can cover both home fire safeties and the considerate parking at the same time.
Thank you very much. Councillor Devine, thank you.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I would very much like some of these leaflets as well. I think round schools is where we find some of the least considerate parking going on, and maybe through the schools and through putting them out to parents would be not a bad idea. Two of the things that I was going to speak about, John spoke about, but it's the hard of hearing smoke alarms. I just think are such a really good idea, and I was wondering who refers you, or who refers the people to you for these. And the other question I have, well, it was about the developing young workforce, which again I think is great. I was just wondering if you were getting any feelings that any of these 4 young people might go on to become firefighters. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions, Councillor Devine. Yes, we're happy again to provide leaflets to yourselves. We might even look at some kind of process where we can do parents' evenings, and we look at for the schools to hand these types of out, and again we can provide some advice at that point. Referrals can come from a number of different partners. It can come from social work, it can come from NHS, it can come from the hospitals. Again, we've got lots of links with the local area, so we take these very seriously, and we tend to get the majority we need to get through those referrals.
Do you get them from NES, North East Sensory Services?
We put off, sorry, did you put off? On the final point on developing workforce, but I think for me about certainly 3 or 4 of the points we work really strongly in partnership with Police Scotland on, and I know Phil and my other colleagues will be keen to talk at these points maybe in their update, but certainly mindful we're not specifically talking about fire matters here, we're talking about about the shared matters. So on developing a workforce and what we did with these people, I think for me, it's not just about a job in the fire service, how we can help young people build a skill set to get a job somewhere. And, and I think that's where we saw the benefits, and certainly some of the work we did done in Dundee. But I think it's our view of what that might look like. It's good to share that with other stakeholders and kind of do that with young people and give them try and give them a positive experience with us and how they may want to move on and be a positive member of the community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Louise Nicholl, thank you.
Thank you. On page 29, time for change and wanted fire alarm signals, I was wondering what action do you take to confirm a fire when there is an AFA? The reason I ask this is because many of the premises that fall under this won't have anyone present to confirm a fire depending on the time of day or the week, for instance, evenings and weekends.
Thank you for the question. There's a number of aspects to the time for change and the new response model for this. There's a number of actions that duty holders can take in regards to their fire risk assessment and ensure their fire risk assessment meets what the needs of the building are. There's a number of things where they can fit different types of detectors, where if their fire alarm panel is smart enough, it can detect that it's not just a single smoke alarm, it can be a multi-activation, which will then send it through as a different type of call. Again, we do call challenge now through the operations colleagues. Again, if there is, we ask initially to see if there is any signs of smoke and fire, and if there are any signs of smoke and fire, of course we will send the nearest response from there. Probably easier to take that one off the table if it's easier, to give you a much more robust report on that. I'm hoping to arrange a meeting regarding the UFAS and bring in some of our local experts into that. So I'd happily take that. If I can take any names at the end of this meeting, and I'll make an arrangement if whether it's a Teams meeting, and we can get much more detail on that, if that would suit members.
Just very quickly, Councillor Nicholl, I think that's a really good question. Just to give colleagues a bit of reassurance that our operations controller, dispatching team have discretion in there, so it is a policy, but we've got opportunity to challenge that, not just in not responding, but also to respond if we feel that's appropriate.
Councillor Proctor.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, gentlemen, for that excellent, very detailed report. I realise that a lot of your statistics are sort of, from reactive situations, and it's good to see the measure of them. I've got two questions, really. First of all, with the recent sort of negative press we've had in regarding reductions in the fire service, and we discussed it the last time, has there been any sort of negative effect of that on recruitment to both full-time and retain firemen into the service? And the second question is, it's really great to see all the initiatives that you've taken, such as the Rossi event and the Kerry 50 Plus and the sensible parking, think before you park. Again, are there any sort of financial restrictions being placed upon you through your budgets to maybe inhibit you from continuing this in the future? With regard to the think before you park, I, like Councillor Bell, happy to get leaflets distributed and probably use some of the agencies which I'm involved to assist with this, because I think it's a message that's really, really important to get out. But these are my two questions, and I wonder if you could answer them. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Proctor. Some really good questions in there. Regarding your first one, impact on firefighter recruitment, the answer is quite simply no. We've had no impact on that whatsoever. In fact, what we are doing, me and the team within Angus and the wider Tayside arena are supporting a review of our recruitment processes to make sure they are fit for purpose. But other than that, we've no new challenges to recruitment from that change to our model. Regarding the amount of effort that we put into community safety activities within the service, it's not. We don't see any impact on that on how changes have been made. We've got our frontline firefighters that do community safety activities. We also have back office uniformed and non-uniformed staff, and we have just got as much focus on making sure they are, if not just meeting the performance now, but exceeding it. So that's our continued focus. And think before you park, I think we better get some more leaflets printed out. We've sent plenty of volunteers coming forward today, so thanks, Councillor Proctor, for another volunteer on that.
Convener, could I just ask a quick supplementary, if I may? And both Scottish Fire and Police Scotland have actually provided a good sort of service by looking after some of the areas in my ward. We're talking about one Trathan and then lately the Backwater Dam, trying to prevent sort of thoughtlessness. Is this going to be able to be continued?
Thank you, Councillor Proctor. Yes, absolutely. After some sad events recently up at Edsall, we've got a real focus on water safety. Again, we've always had that particular focus, but again, we will ensure that's delivered across both Angus and PCAD as a whole.
Thank you very much.
Any other further questions? Councillor Gavin Nicholl.
This is just a query of my own. Are you having any problems with these lithium batteries or any increased problems?
Thank you, Councillor Nicholl. Not at this time. We're not seeing a great deal. Colleagues further south, yes, absolutely. It's something that we will bring to our community safety teams, and again, it's a message we're keen to get out that these are a problem and can be dependent on charging and where they're charged and where they're bought. So again, yes, it's a continued thing we'll look at and address as we see the issues arising locally.
Thank you.
Thank you. Comments? Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Convener. I think, as Councillor Proctor mentioned, going back to the report, a lot of the incidents that you attend are reactionary. You can't predict when someone's going to have a car accident. You can't predict when someone's going to have a fire in their home or their business. But it is good to see in the appendixes the amount of work that is done over and above to try and prevent all those things. And I'll pick up specifically on Exercise Thomas, which I was fortunate enough to be able to attend. Thoroughly enjoyed my day. I personally find it amazing to watch all of the emergency services working together on a specific incident and how they interacted and the training element of that. I also spoke with the Watch Commander Michael Cassie, who organised and planned and facilitated the whole thing. He told me how difficult it was, a task to try and organise to bring all of those services together at the same time, at the same day, to do this thing. So a special thank you to him, and if there's any other events like that, I would encourage any other elected member to participate and to go along and see exactly what happens as it's happening and be part of it. So again, thank you for that.
Thank you. Anyone else? No, I think there's quite a few of us in here over the years. Councillor Devine, you certainly, we've both been, I think, at Forfar Fire Station over our time on the council to what? Yes, quite a few times. And I think one of my ward colleagues, Councillor Dorn's on this call, and we certainly, the four of us, I'm sure Councillor Melville and Councillor Whiteside will agree to get some of your leaflets for parking as well, because the four of us have been contacted, she's nodding her head, just very recently about one of our schools where it's a bit of inconsiderate parking that needs to be. So it might be something that can be dealt with. But just as I always say, you do a tremendous amount of community work over and above your standard duties. So on behalf of this committee, thank you very much. Is there anyone else? Don't see anyone else online. So we've got one recommendation, and we invite to note and comment on the attached quarterly monitoring report, which we have done. Is the report agreed? Okay, thank you very much. Agenda item number 5 is the Police Scotland Angus Local Policing Area Quarterly Report, and its Chief Superintendent Davidson is with us with some of his other colleagues, and I apologise, I can't remember your names. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Convener, and good afternoon, everybody. I'll introduce my colleagues in just a second. I guess before moving into the report for today, I would like to firstly place on record my personal thanks to Chief Inspector Leanne Blacklaw, who's been your local area commander for Angus over the past few years. Leanne, as I'm sure you're aware, has taken on a role in our national partnerships, preventions and community wellbeing portfolio. So she'll be still based locally out of one of the local Angus stations, but doing work on a national basis. She's certainly served Angus well in recent years, and I very much wish her the best in her new role. In terms of introductions, to my right is Chief Inspector Ross Fitzgerald, who takes over from Leanne as your new local area commander, and Ross comes with vast experience in policing from across Tayside and in national functions, and most recently has been the local area commander for Dundee for the past couple of years. So a vastly experienced officer that I am absolutely convinced and sure will be an asset to Angus, and I know you'll all get to know him really well over the coming months. Given this is day 2 for Ross today, and unfair to maybe put him straight behind the mic. Behind me, I've got Inspector Gary Aitken, who has been deputy to Leanne for the last couple of years, who will be available if there's any questions of a particularly local context. In terms of the policing report presented today, it covers Q1, as does the fire service report, and represents the first report for us against the new 3-year local policing plan for Angus that members previously endorsed. As indicated in the presentation of the 3-year police plan, this is refreshed reporting arrangements to how reports have been presented previously, and it sees a different thematic focus in each of the reports that we'll bring to the committee. So aside the summary performance information against our key priorities, members will note that the spotlight focus for today is on the theme of drug and substance harms. That spotlight theme will change each reporting period. So at a future one, it may become road safety, for example, or it may become public protection. And it allows a bit of a deeper dive into a particular area of policing. I will shortly hand over to Chief Inspector Fitzgerald, who will briefly summarise the key performance highlights. And then Ross will hand over to 2 of my colleagues that are on screen around about expertise in the deep dive space. So Chief Inspector John Docherty leads our divisional partnerships, interventions and preventions department, and has a clear focus around about preventions in the drug and substance misuse harms space. John will certainly look at a brief overview of the preventative and supportive work we do in that area, before I'll bring in Detective Inspector Scott Carswell, who has a leading role in some of the more crime work and our enforcement and investigative activities around about drug harms. Following these brief presentations, we will, as always, be available to answer any questions anybody has. I'm conscious it's a full agenda today, so we do intend to try and be brief before bringing in member questions. Thank you.
And thank you, convener and committee members, and I'm grateful for the welcome and the chance to be here on day 2 of my new role. So grateful to Chief Superintendent Davison for the introduction. It's probably slightly concerned by the use of vastly experience, which makes me feel a little old, but we'll try and skip past that. Moving into the performance figures, to say Gary is with us today, but just that commitment, if there is any detail that I don't have at my fingertips today, given how new, and I'll give that personal assurance that I will take those questions away and answer them as promptly as possible thereafter as the day goes on. So just to look into the violence statistics first, just kind of looking at the summary page on page 47 particularly, just a quick focus on common assaults. For me, that bulk crime area is a really good area to focus in to see and check that our performance figures are going in the right direction, our investigations are robust, community teams are working well. So if we'll move into that bulk area, we see a 15% reduction in occurrence rates, which is clearly very welcome in comparison to last year, and also a slight increase in detection rates. So that gives me a great sense that our local officers are working hard in that kind of violence prevention area and are delivering robust investigations. Moving into the far less common crimes of serious assault, again we see a slight reduction in that area of 4 crimes, which again is welcome. We do see a reduced detection rate, but given the number of crimes that have been reported, that kind of large percentage point really kind of relates to 1 detected crime in either direction. So I would ask members maybe not to be distracted by that figure. I would highlight that 5 of those undetected crimes are still live in terms of investigations. We tend to find are more protracted investigations and are perhaps more complex, which can mean they take a little while longer to detect, but looking at them, that we're moving in the right direction with those that remain undetected. The standout statistic for me is probably around the robberies. The Q1 statistic kind of vastly different from the comparison from last year. Fair to say that 2 in Q1 of last year was remarkably low and perhaps not the norm. However, 10 is higher than an area that I will bring a focus to in coming weeks, because that number does stand out for me. There is a new detective inspector working in reactive CID for Angus, Detective Inspector Graham Lee. So
one of my first priorities is to meet with him this week, and we will have a look at that particular statistic. And from the information I have at the moment, there is a kind of familiar pattern to those kind of crimes. They tend to be related to alcohol and substance misuse. A high number of those crimes relate to offences committed where the perpetrator knew the victim prior to the commission of the crime. So perhaps give some reassurance that in terms of the general population, there shouldn't be a great cause for concern and the possibility of becoming a victim of that kind of crime, but all the same, an area that we are looking to work on in coming weeks. Moving on to antisocial behaviour and disorder, again, statistics to reflect on. Overall, crimes in that disorder category down by some 30%, which is very, very welcome. Behaviour incidents demonstrating a 9% reduction. I mean, alongside that, we've got a 30% reduction in vandalisms as well, a crime that is often related to youth antisocial behaviour in particular. So all of the statistics giving a positive picture around Q1. Just to project forward the focus coming into the darker nights, clearly the youth antisocial behaviour that we can sometimes see emerging, where the darkness provides a degree of anonymity that others maybe think they don't have through the summer months. So a real focus for us in terms of that engagement, early education inputs into kind of local schools to try and kind of prevent some of that activity before it happens. And clearly a huge amount of work continuing to be done across the partnership in terms of a focus on youth diversionary activities that is really well supported by the authority that we are grateful for. Into the public protection space, overall Group 2 crimes, so sexual offences, again, significant reductions in numbers there, alongside a really positive statistic in terms of the number of rapes that have been reported in Q1. Clearly a catastrophic and horrendous offence for anybody to suffer. To see a reduction of that number is very, very welcome. And similarly into domestic abuse occurrence rates, a positive reduction in numbers reported. So it's always that conundrum in terms of that area of, are we ensuring that we are accessible to people, that we're able to capture all of the crimes that are occurring? And we get that kind of sense that we are becoming more and more better supported by the partnership across the board, so that there are mechanisms for victims of those kind of crimes to use, so that they can actively pursue criminal inquiry wish to do so. So positive statistics, but I think domestic abuse particularly, there is no room for complacency, and absolutely that needs to be a focus throughout the next number of months. I can report that I've already got meetings in my diary with key individuals across the Violence Against Women Partnership in the area, and those meetings will progress next week. So that the change in post order for Chief Inspector in Angus should not disrupt any of the really positive work that's ongoing, and I'll make sure that doesn't occur. Into road safety, again, can reflect on positive reductions in speeding offences, albeit some concerning rises in drink driving, albeit a smaller number. So I guess a bit of a mixed picture in terms of we are seeing some positive changes in driving behaviour around speeding, but others where that kind of real firm message around drink driving perhaps not hitting home. So further work needing done in that space, just to make sure that the harms for that kind of driving are well known, well presented, and we're educating drivers accordingly. Clearly, our focus remains split between education in terms of all of the activities that you see within the report in terms of trying to modify driving, but also underpinned by frequent and robust enforcement action in the most priority areas. And we see that in kind of twofold. One, on our high-speed trunk roads, where we are more likely to see road deaths and serious road casualties, really well supported by national divisions and road policing, but also that enforcement action that's driven by kind of local complaint and local report, where antisocial behaviour on the roads, higher speeding and low in 30 mile an hour and 20 mile an hour zones is frequent and causes public concern. So a mixed approach hopefully tackles the casualty and road deaths, but also gives public reassurance that antisocial driving in higher built up areas is also being tackled. And lastly, just to move into the acquisitive crime space, I think it's probably important to reflect nationally on acquisitive crime, and that the cost of living crisis and pressure on family incomes across the country is clearly driving higher numbers of crimes across the board, and Angus is not immune to those kind of pressures. So we do see some significant increases in those areas, but not increases that are out of kilter with the rest of the country that would leave me to kind of feel that we have a greater problem in Angus than we see reflected in other areas. Touching on house break-ins is probably worthwhile just reflecting on a more recent series that I know has caused angst in the kind of Arbroath, Moneyfeith, Carnoustie areas, where we've seen a number of fairly high-profile house breakings occur. I suppose to report positively on that, there was a day of action carried out yesterday across in Fife, where a group of travelling offenders have been detected for a number of those crimes which were detected yesterday. So 3 people brought into custody. Without reflecting on it too deeply, it's an ongoing operation. Really positive to see, I think, 13 crimes detected to that particular group, with a huge amount of other information and lines of inquiry generated from yesterday's activity. I know that the Detective Inspector is hoping to get some work out in the media later today just to provide that kind of community reassurance for those who have been the victims of those crimes, but clearly the broader community have heard about them are kind of somewhat concerned around the security of their homes. So a positive start in that area. Touching on frauds, that's one where I'd noticed a particular increase in terms of that statistic. I think it's from my kind of brief review that I've managed to get done yesterday, a lot of that is relating to increases in online offending. So those kind of crimes where it's online kind of confidence scams, particularly generally perpetrated by people who are out with our kind of jurisdiction and out with the UK. So very, very difficult to detect and prosecute, unfortunately. So a real need to focus on our prevention activity to make sure we are providing people with the right information to keep themselves online to try and reduce the number of offences as best can. And again, lastly, just reflecting on shoplifting, which again has seen a significant leap. I think we see a relatively small number of stores which have repeat offences connected to them. The statistical information would suggest that those crimes are much more aligned to people stealing to meet the kind of basic needs and stealing necessities rather than looking to steal things to sell on. It seems to be driven by just people trying to provide in circumstances where incomes are pressurised. So again, education in the space of those particular stores that are hard hit, but ongoing enforcement action there, plus referrals into appropriate support services to make sure that those who are caught are receiving the appropriate support in the aftermath of that offending. I will probably stop there, having maybe bored you already by speaking for too long. I'm not sure, because it's my first committee, so if I've got it wrong, then please let me know, and I will refine my approach for next time. But I will Chief Inspector John Docherty and Detective Inspector Scott Carswell, who will take you through the themed section of the report in terms of drug harm. So, Chief Inspector Docherty.
Thanks, Ross. Good afternoon, convener and committee members. Thanks for this opportunity to come in. I'll provide a bit of support to Ross and Gary. I'll provide you with a bit more context around about our partnership work in Angus, in addition to the spotlight focus, which is covered in the report. Our partnership team consists of a sergeant and 2 officers within Angus. However, we are very closely linked with our internal colleagues from our community policing team, CID, Risk and Concern Hub, to review and provide further prevention and intervention supports to those who are most vulnerable in our communities. And we do that in close collaboration daily with external partners from statutory, voluntary, third sector areas. That will include our daily review of business from our own databases, crime reports, to make sure that we are providing necessary supports to those that are in most need in our communities. In relation to substance harm prevention, mental health, suicide prevention, financial harm, including, as Ross touched on there, online concerns, missing people, and then wider crime prevention supports. In relation to Q1 report and in relation to page 48, violence prevention, I'll give a bit more context around about our mentors in violence prevention collaboration with Angus Women's Aid, which has seen earlier in June 20 people trained from education, Women's Aid, community learning and development, and our own staff to deliver to pupils across the region. We have now undertaken training at 2 schools, Montrose Academy and Webster's High School, and we've trained 50 S5 and S6 pupils who will now go on to mentor S1 and S2 pupils in September onwards around about gender-based violence, men's violence and domestic abuse prevention. A fantastic collaborative piece of work involving our young people as we move forward in these spaces. In addition to that, we've had open days at Dundee and Angus College, Arbroath, for new students who will start their new academic years now, with inputs around about violence prevention, drug and crime prevention, with advice given to approximately 50 new students who attended on those days. In respect to Youth Link and Imagine a Man, the product's now been shared with all 8 Angus secondary schools with a view to implementing further training sessions this year. And as covered within the document, Imagine a Man encourages positive masculinity to change the attitudes and thought processes of our young men who are either perpetrators, victims themselves, or indeed bystanders to men's violence. Moving on into the antisocial behaviour section on page 49, my PIP team have regular meetings with key stakeholders and targeted interventions agreed through the data analysis as captured within the report. I thought it right to highlight the No Knives, Better Lives and the Fearless campaigns, Fearless being the Crime Stoppers campaign for young people, and the products that we've now shared with all 8 secondary schools in Angus to support the prevention of violence and antisocial behaviour. This will be further promoted with engagement sessions throughout the new academic year, and I think it's right to highlight that Beacon High School promoted Fearless courtesy of their senior pupil leadership team, and that should be welcomed and encouraged. In relation to acquisitive crime on page 50, beyond the messaging shared with key partners, my team review all acquisitive crimes on a daily basis, looking to identify repeat victims, in addition to contacting new victims to offer supports. This will include victim support service referrals, the temporary provision of home security measures such as ring doorbells, letter guards. In addition to our staff are trained in crime prevention and can provide either general advice or home surveys. And our staff will also coordinate letter drops in locations that have been targeted by acquisitive crime, for example, house break-ins, whether domestic or commercial premises. In relation to the thematic spotlight on page 56, with particular focus on our non-fatal overdose meetings and the representation and priority actions which are captured on page 57 of the report, I think it's right to highlight that in this quarter there have been 34 NFOD discussions in Angus. Of those, 11 were female and 23 were male. Of the females, 3 had previously been discussed at the group, and 2 of those females have been discussed twice during this quarter on 2 separate incidents. Of the males, 9 have previously been discussed within the group. 1 of those males has been discussed twice in this quarter, and 1 other male discussed 3 times. And for each case discussed, support and outreach was considered and provided by the appropriate partner agency. In respect to naloxone, we have now trained 150 officers in Angus, and training continues in that regard, with a number of success stories across the Tayside area. And with regard to the partnership intelligence portal on page 59, the PIP is secured as a confidential electronic system developed by Police Scotland to enable partner agencies to share important information that they receive during the course of their work. The portal provides capable partners with a means to securely and discreetly submit information whilst maintaining the safeguards to protect the source of the information. It does not replace the current incident or crime reporting methods, in particular the mechanisms for child and adult referrals. It should enhance the procedures that we already have in place for all of those. The information provided through the PIP portal is dealt with as intelligence by Police Scotland. Intelligence is usable information that will be subject to the recognised processes to risk assess and determine how freely it can then be used. This process is aimed at developing information around about threat, risk and harm by perpetrators and identifying key locations. And by trying to capture what key partners already see and hear, and then know that they can provide that information to us to allow us to then protect against those risk and harm concerns. So the key aim is to provide a safe and secure pathway for partner agencies to share information that they believe that the police may need in order for the investigation and prevention of crime. And so far in Tayside, we've delivered training to several partners across Dundee, including Women's Aid, We Are With You, Hillcrest Futures, Positive Steps, The Corner, Dundee City Council fraud teams, ASBT, their up-and-coming training for the DCC housing team also. And we are currently exploring training within Angus through Karen Melville in her new role. And that concludes the overlay of the partnership work that's currently ongoing for Q1 in Angus by the team. And I'll now hand over to Detective Inspector Scott Carswell. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me along today. So it's already been alluded to, I'm the inspector for the Serious Organised Crime team within Division. It's made up of 1 detective sergeant and 6 DCs, which all work under myself. We work very closely with our intel unit, our OC2 unit, which is the national team that cover national organised crime. And we also work very closely with Chief Inspector John Docherty's team and with partners after we do some enforcement. The role of my team is very much looking at what we call mapped crime groups. So we look at a problem in an area, and if it's decided it needs to be mapped, that's when we move forward with what we call the 4D approach, when we look to detect, disrupt, deter and divert. And that means that we can disrupt the crime group and dismantle it in such a way that it's no longer able to work in their communities. It's quite an effective way of working, however, it's quite time and resource intensive. So we also look at other opportunities for quick wins round about drug enforcement, for drug search warrants and searches and targeting the right people at the right time. So both means really work well for us as for the first part of the year. We're very much intelligence led, so we need to work very closely with our intelligence unit, who have a field intelligence officer in Angus, who I work very closely with as well, and we look to how we can develop intelligence and take it to a point where we're ready to move on with enforcement. My team also manage serious crime prevention orders, so this is when somebody has been imprisoned and sentenced, and on their release they're then managed very closely by my team with specific measures that have been put in place to ensure that they don't get involved in any further criminality, and we try and divert them away from that. We do have 1 such person who is monitored in Angus, and I have to say this is the first time I've been involved in this type of work, and it's working really well, and it's had a positive impact in that individual's life. So again, a good proactive approach. Just touching on what Chief Inspector John Docherty mentioned there with the Partners Intelligence Portal, I would encourage that to get used by everybody in the local authority area. Having worked to a lot of the intelligence we get that allows us to move on with enforcement comes from our partners that work in the community, through whether it's community wardens, social work or health workers. They get so much intelligence on a daily basis that doesn't always get disseminated to ourselves. And with this portal, it's a good way to capture that. And then it's my job, through working with the divisional intelligence team, to develop that intelligence and take it to a point where we can do enforcement. So as a councillor, if you're aware of any issues in your area that needs targeted, if the intelligence is fed through the portal, it will get to us, and we thereafter prioritise how we're going to target that. A lot of the work we're doing at the moment is moving towards the drug harm aspect, and unfortunately with drugs deaths, we look at the information that can be gleaned from them. We've got a new software system where we can download all the information that we get from phones and whatnot onto one system, so it's researchable. So I've now got my team trained up in that, and we're utilising that, so we've got a constant review of the information that's coming from these inquiries. Again, this gives us a picture of what's happening, and through working closely with Chief Inspector Docherty's team, we get an update on toxicology reports and whatnot. It allows us to identify the drugs that are being highlighted from drugs deaths, and allows us to marry this up against intelligence so that we can then target the drug dealers that are dealing the harmful drugs that are having an impact in our communities. just due to the software just coming to light, this is, you know, a new approach for us, but not that new. We've always kind of worked this way and prioritised the intelligence we're getting. So I'm hoping that starts giving us some really good results from that. The toxicology reports we do get are unfortunately, just due to the timescales it takes for them to come through, they are a wee bit behind, but it gives us a better picture of what to prioritise forward. In terms of drug enforcement in the last, the first period of the year, you can see there that Class A drugs, we've got £8,500 worth off the street, and Class B drugs, £15,000 worth off the street. Again, not too bad. Our enforcement is picking up again. On the back of COVID, it was difficult to operate during that period, and it did have an impact on how we were going about things. But again, we do see more enforcement coming. With my team, as I said, I've only had the 6 to deal with it, so we do work closely with local policing and assist them with any operations they want to do and give them advice. But my team will focus on the more, let's just say, more advanced inquiries that maybe need a bit of work. And if we are unsuccessful with initial enforcement through drug search warrants, we might look to see how we can develop means to target those that are dealing with drugs. And that's really it for my team, unless there's any questions.
Thanks, Scott and John. So, Convener, just over for any questions.
Thank you. Well, there's certainly, Phil, a lot of experience in yourself for your first report. Well done. And everybody as well. The 2 officers online and yourself, Phil. There's a lot of information you've shared with us. So I am quite sure there will be questions. Councillor Bell, and then Councillor Devine, and then Councillor Shepherd. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you everyone for your report there. And I'd also like to record for her role, and particularly around gender-based violence. She's been a fantastic advocate for tackling that, and I'm delighted to hear she's going on to national opportunities, which is fantastic. And that, I guess, links up. I know Police Scotland is a partner of Public Health Scotland, so that public health approach, particularly around those issues, is absolutely vital. So really pleased to see that, and I'm pleased to see the rollout of the naloxone training. I particularly wanted to pick up on that, and those 7 administrations in Angus will hopefully have saved those 7 lives. I think that's really important to acknowledge. But obviously there is a link with mental health and around MAT Standard 9, and the Angus ADP had a session on that last week, and I just wondered, this will have a big impact for you on the ground here on MAT Standard 9 in terms of the number, the proportion of calls that you get. I just wondered if you would be able to give us a bit of a picture of that at the moment, and what the thinking is in terms of how you manage that with other statutory and third sector organisations, because I know it's a huge impact on, and you are literally a life-saving service at the sharp end. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Bell, and I'll certainly pass those comments on to Leanne, as I will from anyone else today as well. Totally agree with you about the rollout of naloxone. That is 7 lives saved. You know, we're not only carrying that ourselves, but very much trying to advocate and support the rollout of naloxone into various other areas, so that tool is available. In terms of the pressures around about mental health and you know, really clear challenges on policing, I think I've reported here before that around about 80% of our demand now is more vulnerability space than traditional crime base and space. And this is an area that therefore is really important in terms of those initial contacts into the police. We are often, with being the 24-hour service, that first point of contact in a lot of cases. So there is always that threat, harm, vulnerability review, where there's that immediate need. We will be there, but it's the broader basis of support and help that comes from others that ultimately leads to looking at trying best to support people through their periods of challenge. So we work very closely through the structures within each of our local areas, first of all, so the chief officer group structures, the various committees, We work very much on a day in, day out, hand-to-hand basis with a range of partners, whether that be the statutory partners or voluntary sector. We have a number of mechanisms. I could go through loads of initiatives that we do, whether that be our custody arrest referral scheme, for example. So anybody that comes into us in crisis, there's that immediate thought to connection. And there's already been examples given in some of the injects today around about even where we have some of our most serious offenders. It's thinking about vulnerability and connection because that reduces future harms. There is clearly still a lot of work to do to both increase capacity and prevent further and reduce demand in our society. And that is a massive commitment from policing, but I'm sure I speak on behalf of a number of partners in the room and elected members in terms of being committed into that space to do the best we can do and try and get the best services we can, both locally, regionally and nationally. Hope that helps answer.
Thank you. Councillor Devine.
Thanks, Convener. This has been great. Having Scott and John here as well has really given us a rounded view of everything, and the partnership working that's going on is just wonderful. Thank you very much for all of that information. Just wondered if Scott could give us some idea of how to get in touch with that portal for intelligence. Maybe that can be sent out to us later. That would be helpful. I just had a question away from that. It's on page 50. The reported crimes of fraud are rising. We know that, but the experience of 27.9% increase in Angus against Scotland's 8.5% increase is a bit concerning. Do you have any idea why that might be the case? To commend you on the rider refinement north, because we know that there's still a lot of people dying on motorbikes. So I'm glad that this is going ahead and the training is going ahead. I was wondering if there was any idea of numbers who have participated in Angus, just to give us some idea of the engagement there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Devine. I suppose just taking those points in turn, and then I might bring Ross in around about the fraud aspect of things, because I know he had been having a look at that. Firstly, in terms of the portal, so the portal involves an element of training and log-on, which we're rolling out with the third sector and other partners in that respect. But there are many other means and ways in which the submission of information can come from the public and or partners. I would very much highlight Crime Stoppers, direct conversations to your local officers, and in via our Contact Us forum or otherwise, as the provision of that information, as has been described, really does help to build a rich picture and enable enforcement action. In terms of the rider refinement north, I don't think I've got the exacting figures, but that's something we can come back to. What I can say quite positively is that the uptake and the evaluations from users has been really positive. So I'll take that as a wee note. Ross and I could feed that back to you just to give you those figures. But in terms of fraud.
Yeah, just in terms of fraud, it's a statistic that I looked at just yesterday, to be honest, because I thought the question may arise. So what I can say is that the comparator to last year, the area that's occurred is definitely in terms of online crimes. They tend to be crimes which are called kind of sextortion crimes. So it's where people are being effectively drawn into kind of the confidences of perpetrators, and they build up a relationship, then ask for indecent images to be shared online, and in the back end of that are offering threats that if they don't provide a certain amount of money, those images will be shared across their contacts on social media. So that is the crime type that I'm seeing in comparison to last year. Why that would be in higher numbers in Angus in comparison to the national average is a question that I was unable to get to the bottom of in the short period of time I had yesterday, but is certainly one that I will look into more kind of closely. Some of that is around the demographics of the area and the ages of victims, perhaps, but probably needs a little bit more work for me to kind of fully understand why the percentage rate for Angus is a little higher places. But I can certainly come back to you once I've got a kind of fuller response for.
Thank you. Did pretty well in 24 hours, I must say.
Confinement north as well. Sorry, I can't give you the number just now, but what I do know from speaking to colleagues in roads policing is that all of the spaces on that course that were available to Angus were fully used. So effectively we're working at capacity. So it's more around, you know, building capacity of courses rather than trying to encourage people to go, because there is absolutely an appetite from local people to go and do it.
Thank you. Councillor Shepherd.
Thanks, Convener. Just on page 47 of the report, I was just going to be raising the issue of Arbroath. There's obviously been, unfortunately, a spate of burglaries in the area, in areas where there wouldn't usually, the communities wouldn't usually expect that. So I was glad to hear the update that there's probably linked to those. And I was just wondering what practical advice you could give the residents of Arbroath, and also a reassurance, like for example, will there be a increased police presence for a while just to reassure people? Because you know, I know the burglaries, the houses were quite damaged. I heard maybe television screens damaged, smashed, things like that. So just not something the residents are used to. So just appreciate a little bit more on that, but really good to hear that there's been progress made.
Yeah, I suppose just to reflect on the crimes of house break-ins we've seen, so well organised with a similar MO when we've seen properties where perpetrators believe there will be high value kind of goods to be stolen are being targeted, and often at times when occupants are on holiday. So I suppose in terms of the messaging that we would like to put out there is around, you know, being proactive as a neighbour in terms of reporting suspicious vehicles, perhaps being particularly observant if you know your neighbours are away on holiday for an extended period of time, just to give that kind of casual surveillance of those properties and making sure you're reporting any of those concerns into Police Scotland, so we can respond to that hopefully prior to crimes occurring rather than reacting once they have taken place. In terms of the high-profile patrols, again, something I'm more than happy to discuss with our kind of community sergeant if you're picking up that people are looking for them to be delivered at this particular time. So I can take that away from this meeting and look at how we deliver that for the people who have been affected. But I'm hopeful that the arrests made yesterday will make a real kind of strong impact on that. And I know that we are going out in terms of social media and other media outlets today to try and just get that message out that arrests have been made, which hopefully in and of itself will give a little reassurance to kind of community members. So hopefully all those steps combined should start to build that wee bit of kind of public reassurance around those crimes, because I know they have been impactful for people in that area.
Thanks very much.
Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Convener. My question is in regards to page 46 of the combined reports for the local policing priorities, specifically target those involved in the supply of drugs or drug supply. In my day job, I suppose you could call it, I spend a lot of time driving about the majority of the towns in Angus, and where I live in Brecon, there are a couple of people that are throughout the town as being drug dealers, supplying cocaine and goodness knows what else to people. And they carry on their business as if it was a perfectly legitimate thing to do in car parks, out and about, back and forth between Arbroath and various other places. So obviously there's a lot of things going on in the background, because as you said, a lot of your work is intelligence led, so there may be intelligence there waiting for the opportunity to pounce, so to speak, as you did at the swimming pool here in Forfar just last week. So thank you for that one. But with people like those, the public perceive these people as nothing being done about them. As I said, they're going about this as like it's their normal day-to-day job. So what more can be done, whether it be the use of the stop and search that you've mentioned in the report as well, or whether it, does that also include vehicles, the registration numbers? If there's any suspicion, can you use those stop and search things for a vehicle as well as with people out walking on the streets as well? Thank you.
Maybe just to touch on stop and search first then. So I mean, stop and search powers as they relate to drugs possession and supply comes from kind of section 23 of the Misuse of Drugs Act. So absolutely we've got powers there where there is suspicion that someone is in possession of drugs to stop and search an individual, and also to search vehicles under the provisions of that act. So those options are there. Obviously within this a particular case is difficult. However, we have spoken earlier, and I think that there are absolutely bits and pieces of work that we can do in collaboration with you and your community members to try and focus on that area. Difficult to go into what may or may not be going on behind the scenes, but absolutely, as Scott's mentioned earlier, that kind of building up a rich picture of intelligence, so that when we do choose to opt for enforcement action, and that enforcement action is absolutely successful, delivers the seizure of drugs and also arrests, because involving ourselves in enforcement activity prior to gathering that rich picture of intelligence can often lead to effectively missed opportunities, which is the last thing we would want to see. So I am more than happy to engage with you in that. I think there's a real emphasis on gathering information from local people. We will very often find that all sorts of people will know about the activities of individuals, presume that the police are aware of those activities as well, and therefore maybe choose not to report, thinking that maybe else has done that already. So there's maybe some work to do for us in terms of our community officers and amongst this to make sure that we are speaking to the right people in those communities to encourage the provision of good quality intelligence to let us act. But as I've said to you prior to the meeting, I'm more than happy to look at that specific issue in conjunction with yourself and colleagues who are on teams in terms of Scott's team, looking at both the kind of prevention space and any enforcement action that may be proportionate to deliver. So looking forward to tackling that with you as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Proctor.
Convener, more of a comment, so if there are any more questions, I'll mark time until you come up ask for comments.
Okay, yeah, there's still a question. Councillor Beattie, thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Sorry, I'd just like to ask a bit about the Imagine a Man programme and how that ties in with partnership work with Angus on violence against women and girls. Could you maybe fill in a bit more detail for that?
Yeah, thanks. I might possibly bring John in a second, but the whole approach that we clearly have around about violence against women and girls is very much taking a couple of different angles to it. So one is the focus on male, and the other is the focus on clearly female as well. So there are undoubted links in Imagine a Man encouraging positive masculinity for attitudes. With a view and a focus to two parts to it. One around about what behaviours, being aware of behaviours, being aware of attitudes, being aware of presentation, being aware of trying to get the right phrase, the hidden stereotypes that people carry. That was the phrase I was kind of looking for. And using that platform to inform, encourage, and ultimately create debate and discussion that then leads to a better informed youth that can hopefully inform life and into the future. So that will and should have a positive effect in terms of violence against women and girls. But additionally, we spoke earlier on, the fire service colleagues did, it's got a broader aspect to it as well. So it's about trying to round our people, the young people, in the best way we possibly can for their future lives.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Okay. Comments, Councillor Proctor?
Thank you very much, Convener. I'd just like to thank the Chief Superintendent and his team for what I think has been one of the best and proactive briefs that I've heard in 10 plus years as a local authority member. It's really good to look at the report and see a lot of the good news on the reduction in the violence, the public protection, the rape, the domestic abuse. I intimated to the Chief Superintendent earlier on that community councils are always only too happy to have a police presence, and I think there from the local communities, people like Inspector Carswell would get information, just like my colleague Ross Gregg has said, and I think that engagement with the public positive. But the other thing which I find very encouragement encouraging is the proactive engagement with school pupils, because I think education of our young folk will actually in the future pay dividends and will maybe cut out a lot of the unnecessary crime and bad behaviour in the future. And the last thing I just want to say is I hope that Tayside Police is not going to go down the route of employing electric vehicles where they've maybe got to stop and a chase because they're on out of fuel. But that's something maybe for the future. But gentlemen, thank you very much for an excellent brief, very proactive and very reassuring. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Proctor. Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Convener. I'd probably like to echo quite a few of the words of Councillor Proctor there. It's good to actually see you physically here in the chamber with us. It does make a big difference. It's a pleasure to have you here, so thank you. I'd also like to commend you on a lot of the work that you do, especially around about the drugs and addiction. But it's a difficult thing. We want to try and stop the supply, but at the same time, we want to help those that are affected. So it's great to see that you take part in the non-fatal overdose calls every week, and also with the introduction of the carrying of the naloxone. I too carry the naloxone. I was trained by Councillor Jill Scott, thank you to her, last year in conjunction with a lot of the work that I do with people in Forfar that have addiction issues, whether that be drugs or whether that be alcohol. So I'll always be there to support them, and just in case, help avert a tragedy. So it's great to see that's there. Councillor Scott, she'd also brought up a full council meeting earlier in the year to encourage the council as a whole to form this as part of their refresher first aid training, and she offered all that training to all the elected members. So if any of the elected members haven't received their naloxone training, I would strongly encourage you to do so and help break the stigma around drug use for people that do suffer with that. Thank you.
Councillor Dorn.
Yeah, thank you. So I wanted to just say a big thanks to the community officers from particularly Monifeith and Sidlaw ward, who've been doing a great job getting around the many community councils that we have in that area and being visible at those, because I think that's, as has been mentioned, really important part of the work, to be visible and listening to issues that people have and challenges in those areas. So I just wanted to reflect on that. And I also wanted to mention the naloxone as well. It's fantastic to hear that the operational officers are trained and equipped to administer naloxone in the event of a drug overdose. And as you mentioned, it's not only up to the police or emergency services to deliver that anyone can carry out the training and carry naloxone, which I do as well. And as just been mentioned, last year I brought the motion to Angus Council to encourage all staff to undertake that training. So it's available to all staff at Angus Council. So it'd be great to see them taking it up, and also the councillors as well, because I carry it too. I try to think of it as being able to kind of use one of the defibrillators that we often have around our areas now, that it's something that anyone can do. The training is straightforward. And you never know when you might need it. So being prepared is better than being not. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? No, I would just like to echo my thanks to you all as well for your attendance here today, and the fire service, and for all the work that you do in your day-to-day policing and firefighting, but also your community work, because we read it regularly in the press, and as I've said many times sitting in this chair, I follow quite a lot of your Twitter accounts, so I see what the community work and the good work that is done and appreciated by the community. Now, it's at this stage our Deputy Chief Executive usually reminds me that the next two reports, if you have time, if you can stay to, and if I forget, please feel free to leave after the end of item 7. If you can, if you're busy, and I know you are, then please, I appreciate you can feel free to leave. Thank you. Okay, we'll go on to agenda item number 6, which is the Angus Child Protection Committee annual report, and we have our Angus Chief Social Worker, Miss, I think that's your correct title. No?
No, I'm Alison Todd. I'm the independent chair.
Okay, my apologies, Alison. I wrote Catherine's name down on this one. Okay, you can just... Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'm getting terrible feedback, so I'll try not to be distracted by it and just take you through the report. So thank you very much, Convener and elected members, for this opportunity to share the Angus Child Protection Annual Report with you today. As you all know, the Child Protection Committee is a multi-agency committee where we all work together to protect children in Angus. I hope that in a short period of time, I'll be able to share with you the key data and developments and answer any questions that you might have. So the first thing to say is this report is from the 21st, August the 21st, August 2021, sorry, to July 2022. So I think that that's interesting in terms that it covers the period that we were emerging from the COVID pandemic, and we began to see the emerging landscape of child protection and also the cost of living crisis. I'm just going to mention that in terms of leadership, the Child Protection Committee reports regularly to the Chief Officers Group and shares with them any risks or any significant changes or developments. So the first thing I'm going to say is that following feedback actually from this committee last year, I do now attend the Angus Integrated Children's Services Group to ensure that the work of the Child Protection Committee is fully aligned with child poverty, getting it right, the promise, and that has been a really good development for me in terms of making sure that the other committees like us are accountable for the different emergent sort of national landscape. I'm just going to highlight the key priorities and developments made by the group in the year was further developing the safe and together approaches to domestic abuse. And I think that that's quite evident in some of the data in the report. We also developed our approaches to engaging children, young people and families by further embedding Prepare, so that we were fully supporting a strength-based practice in child protection planning. We extended our advocacy provision and certainly not least of all is the changes that we've had to make to bring our practice and policy in line with the new and refresh of the national guidance for child protection. And another key area was data. We've been working towards the national data set for a long time now, and I would say that this was the year where we really started to be able to look across the piece and really sort of analyse and dive into some of that data. And finally, our role is always to review, develop and improve and learn. And that's done across the year and continue to do. So just moving on to the statistics, which start on page 12 for members. So the first piece of data is really the PRAM, the pre-birth allocation meetings. This again is an area of work that we continue to review and develop. And from the data, you will see that the referrals have remained fairly static for this, for people pre-allocating. Over the last 2 years, they've remained pretty static, and we continue to monitor and develop. And this is one policy where we continue to update the practice and review this. Again, if you look at figure 3, the number of child concern reports have shown a year-on-year decrease. However, what is quite significant about that is that the child concern reports with a child protection marker have increased by over 50% on the previous year. And we work really closely with our police colleagues alongside that. And I think that demonstrates that we are getting it right or getting better at identifying the children at risk. So as I said, the number of child protection, the number of concern reports with the child protection marker are up, showing that the there are more significant concerns for children. And alongside that, we've had a steady increase in the number of referrals requiring follow-up action by services. And I think some of this we predicted in terms of coming out of COVID, and some of this is about how we have managed to adapt and improve our practice. Just alongside thinking about these statistics, I just wanted to draw your attention to the early screening assurance group that's also mentioned in the report. And that's a multi-agency forum that we have in Angus to ensure that we do have adequate systems and processes in place to identify and support children from birth to 18 who are identified by Police Scotland in child concern reports. And just draw your attention that during the year we looked at 72 police concerns, and there was a high degree of confidence that the wellbeing and protection concerns reported to the local authority by the police and shared, that they are actually shared with agencies appropriately, and that there is a recording of the incidents and issues and appropriate follow-up where this is required. So I think that gives some assurance. And just to also say that police concerns is something that we regularly discuss with our colleagues, particularly if they show any trends. So just to mention again the data, is that we have a well-established self-evaluation and continuous subgroup within the committee now, and they have a remit to gather and analyse and report on any of the key child protection data. We have really focused on the full implication of the data set, and already are beginning to do a sort of deep dive into some of the information that we're getting. But to say that the first version was presented in at the Child Protection Committee in November 2021, and so moving on from that, just I suppose to say that the work is still in the early stages, but we already have identified key areas for a fuller report, and we have looked at IRDs, interagency referral discussions, and we know that nationally there's been an increase in IRDs, which definitely demonstrates an area of developing practice, but is also in line with the increase in police concern reports and the more significant child protection markers. So it's really consistent with an increase in demand for wellbeing and protection post-pandemic, which we always predicted. Moving on to the next chart, which is child protection investigations. Again, we have shown figure 7. This indicates an overall increase in demand, but the number of investigations has remained static. And this is something that we will look closer at through the national data set. But we have already identified that some of this might be because of the change in our practice from recording pre-birth assessments as child protection investigations, and that may have altered the numbers in some way. Worthy of note is also the increase in joint forensic medical examinations and joint investigative interviews. These are very small numbers, and as highlighted in the report, could be due to sibling groups, and we know that there were 3 sets of sibling groups included in these figures. And also in terms of the joint investigative interviews, where again we've seen an increase in this, and I think that these are 2 areas where we should keep an eye in terms of the development work towards Barnhouse, that we are working with our partners, PAN Tayside, actually, to see how we can put some of the principles in place. And I would expect that there may be some changes, or certainly good data following on from that in the coming coming years or weeks, actually, as we work towards these principles. Moving on to the number of children on the Child Protection Register, we note that there has been a steady increase from this period, and that would be in line with the referrals with the child protection marker. If I move on to figure 11, we will see that there's a noticeable increase of domestic abuse concerns, and I think this really ties in with some of the work outlined by our police colleagues earlier. I know that one of the key areas that came from our last inspection was that we perhaps weren't as good at identifying domestic abuse in some of our concerns, and I think with the training we've turned that around and demonstrated that domestic abuse is now an area where our practitioners and frontline staff are trained to identify and take action on. Moving on to the last one, where we are looking at child protection orders, and to note again that we closely monitor our child protection orders, and that, you know, fluctuations in figures are very often caused by sibling groups, but this is something that we're able to work to look very closely at to make sure that we're getting that right. The final area that I'd just like to draw is the role of the Child Protection Committee is also one of public information and communication. And in this year, we did begin to develop a public protection website. So it was a one-stop place for people to go if they required support or needed to know where to refer on to. And also we engaged in many activities, and again around domestic abuse actually was one of the key areas that we tried to highlight, particularly during COVID. So the sort of conclusion, I think, is that we did manage the COVID recovery, have put many things in place that we learned from that period, and continue to improve and develop our services. And also close to the end of the report, you'll see the key development areas for 2022 and 23. And I'm happy to take questions now.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Wan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Alison, for that report. Mine's is a very simple question. I know that nearly everything you said has been an increase in demand of the service, just really to find out if the service is coping.
Okay, I would say that across the board with all partners and all my colleagues, people are most definitely feeling overwhelmed and are actually feeling the pressure from the increased demands. However, I think that we can still be confident that children and young people in Angus who require services are being identified and receiving them. I think that the areas that that people are very good at prioritising and deciding what are the areas that they might drop, and often that could be maybe learning and development, which is an area that we're looking at very closely and trying to find different ways to engage staff to make sure that they get the information and training that's required, but are able to do that within currently quite heavy workloads.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Mrs Williamson, of course.
Yeah, just to add to that, Councillor Wan, I mean, this is very much a risk-based approach to everything we do. It's a multi-agency response, and Chief Officers Group just met yesterday to have a look in great detail about any change in our statistics. So it's something that is kept very close to all what we're doing across the multi-agency partnership within Angus.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Councillor Doran, question?
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. My first one was capacity and demands on the service, but I think that's already been answered. Although, yeah, worried about the fact if people are removing the learning and development opportunities to carry out their work, that's not a good situation to be in long term. But I wanted to ask, relating to the statistics that you mentioned around examinations, I know you mentioned there's maybe an explanation for those numbers, but could you tell me at what point the next steps are triggered, and what would that mean? What monitoring is done on those figures, and what does the escalation look like if they were to keep going up? And my other question, if I can ask it at the same time, if that's all right, relates to the stats on page 94, which is relating to the staff, teachers and early years staff in the inductions. The numbers undertaking that are quite low, but obviously I presume it's people who are new into post. I want to know if already practicing members of staff have refreshers or opportunities for training, and if probationers are included in that as well. They also get that training too.
Okay, can you tell me, I've got the report in front of me, but it doesn't go up to 94.
Maybe I'm skipping on that one. Let me just check it.
Oh, it'll be your papers that are 94.
It's the combined papers.
Yes,
yes.
yes,
So it is on figure 14.
Figure 14.
I'll answer the question around the child protection training. Sorry, Alison. I was going to come in on the child protection training for our staff. Bearing in mind what a fantastic independent chair you are and how you challenge us. And the diagram is really around about the Angus Council staff. So the start of term there, the very first day is an in-service day. It's member of staff to undertake child protection training on an annual basis. So I hope that gives you the assurance, Councillor Dorn.
Thank you, that's great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we'll go back to the forensic interviews. So in terms of the medical examinations, I think there are so many things at play in terms of forensic medical examinations, and while we've identified that there are 3 sets of siblings which has accounted for here, I think what I can give you in terms of reassurance, because the numbers are so low at the moment, it's really easy to have a look at those figures and find out exactly what it's telling us. I think my sort of hope, if you like, would be that those figures potentially increase further as we adopt the Barnhouse principles, because what we know is that it's incredibly difficult, particularly for older children, to undergo these types of medical examinations. And what I would hope is that as we adopt the principles and look at whether it's a building or whether it's a culture or whether it's an ethos across Angus of how we actually make those forensic medical examinations more accessible for young people, I think that we are likely to actually see an increase in that. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think it would be. Yeah. I think the reassurance, it comes from like when next steps will be kind of taken, so that how this is monitored, so that if there is like an issue, that'll be acted on fairly quickly.
Yeah, that I would give you absolute assurance of that the figures are looked at regularly, and where necessary, we'd have further analysis of this, and that would either be proactively done by the subgroup, or it may be done by actually one of the partners, noticing a trend and bringing, health, for instance, noticing a trend and actually bringing it to the Child Protection Committee. However, at the moment, I would think that there are probably, young people who might not undergo a forensic medical examination because we don't quite have all the services in place. So I think it's probably an area where we may well see an increase as we get better at meeting the needs of young people. But at the moment, with the low numbers, I don't have any cause for, concern in terms of the people that we're dealing with now. But nationally, we know that this is an area that we need to improve on.
Yeah, thank you.
Just to add around the medicals, I mean, they're a health concern. I'm not aware of any issue accessing them, and it might be worth just asking Catherine Lindsay, Chief Social Work Officer, to confirm that.
Thank you, Margot. So just to confirm, so the ordinary route of access to a forensic medical for a child or a young person would be as part of an ongoing child protection investigation. Those are jointly run by Police Scotland colleagues and social work colleagues who all report into the Child Protection Committee. And I'm pleased to report that young people do tend to have to travel to the Dundee area to access those medicals. There is no question of difficulty in people to access a forensic medical when that is indicated. Obviously, for some reasons, forensic medicals may take place in a hospital-based setting. Sometimes children and young people may in fact be inpatients at the time those are required, but they can also be accessed in a bespoke community setting at Seymour House in Dundee, and that's a facility that we have access to in our arrangements with Dundee City Council and NHS Tayside colleagues. So I hope that provides some assurance around the arrangements that are currently in place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Catherine. Councillor Bell.
Thank you. In fact, my Catherine's reply there. Alison, thank you for this report. And I was in a meeting, an event yesterday where vicarious trauma for staff was very much to the forefront. So I do recognise the impact these really difficult situations have on staff. But given what Alison's just said about expecting to see these figures rise, and based on what Catherine's current setup, do we have capacity to deal with additional demand without placing more stress on the children and young people involved? And also, what support do those young people get to go through this process? Thank you.
Perhaps Catherine will come in after, but my understanding at the moment, what I have across Tayside is that we are. So I suppose the first thing is we're constantly improving services to support children and young people, and we'll have counselling support services in school, and I think there's been an increase in that recently. And we also have our and we'll have the increase in advocates, as is mentioned in the report, and also our third sector colleagues who offer very good services for children and families who may have been in this situation if they choose to undertake them. So I think what we already have services in place, but I think what Barnhouse principals have encouraged us to do is to think across and make even more improvements. And I think, as I always say every year, improvement is the key protection. So we are currently working with our colleagues in Perth and Dundee, and that's multidisciplinary as well, to see how we can make the most of the capacity that we have to meet these principles that make it I don't like the word easier, but make the services as good as they possibly can be for children and young people who may have experienced trauma of any kind. And additionally, we are working on a bid, Tayside as well, to try and get some money to be one of the sort of this area of work to really hold up our our service and our practice as a model for the rest of Scotland that might be adapted. And I think that we have an interesting landscape in terms of the rurality of Perth and Angus, and then the the population of Dundee, to really try and find something that is able to meet the needs of all children and young people in the area.
Thank you. I'm happy to come in just in terms of the support available for children to access forensic medicals, which I think was part of your question. So, I mean, these are very individualised situations and can require a forensic medical because they've been placed at risk by members of their family or by other people. So obviously our approach to supporting children to access any forensic medical will depend very much on the circumstances through which the investigation has arisen. Largely, firstly, we would be looking at family choice. So some families wish to make their own arrangements, and that is absolutely appropriate, and they would be met at the place by suitable professionals who have been identified as part of the wider kind of ongoing package of support there. In terms of those children and young people who are not to be transported and supported directly by members of their own, we would look to have a consistent member of staff wherever possible and take them to the location of their forensic medical and provide ongoing support whilst that's been undertaken if that's their choice. Obviously it does depend also on the child's particular circumstances and their age and stage of development, their ability to understand what it is that's happening. But this is a service that is delivered by NHS Tayside colleagues. They're not here today to speak to the detail of how they go about that, but they are very much informed by trauma-informed principles in terms of how they undertake that work, and in which they undertake it attends to both the trauma-informed principles as much as possible, but also bear in mind that it does need to be a clinical setting and conducted in such a way that it's suitable for evidential purposes if that's required as part of any ongoing process. So again, I know that that's a bit surface level in terms of it does look different on a case-by-case basis, but I hope that gives you a bit of a sense of how we tend to approach that and that people are not left just to make their own arrangements in the situation that might be required.
Okay, thank you both. Councillor Devine.
My question's been answered, Convener, but I would like to make a comment if nobody else wants a question.
I think that would be very appropriate. There's no other questions, so that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just I remember when you introduced Prepare to us. And I was quite excited about that. I thought it was a great initiative, and it looks as if it's proving to be so, and it helps families with these very difficult child protection planning meetings that they have. And I thank you very much for actually giving us a short film to have a look at. It certainly gave us an idea of what goes on. So that was a really good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? No. Well, there's two recommendations there. I think it's had a good airing, and you've seen the areas for development in the report as well. Is this report agreed? Okay, thank you very much. So agenda item number 7 is the Violence Against Women Partnership Annual Report, and we have Mr Ewan West, the Independent Chair. Good afternoon, Ewan, and welcome back again. And I believe you're going to introduce this report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Convener and elected members. Yeah, I'll just run through the report that I think everyone has a copy of. This report covers the period of April 21 to March 22. And as I go through the report, I think we will to update members on some significant progress that's been made since the timing of this report. We've made some really good progress, and I'll touch on that as we go through the report today. I think just before I go into the detail, I think we've heard from Police Scotland, Scottish Fire and Rescue, and also from Alison, that gender-based violence is involved in all of our work across all of the key partners. And I think this report and the subsequent work that's been done since then, there's a real determination and positive focus between all of the partners, the Child Protection Committee, the Adult Protection Committee, to make a really significant impact on reducing gender-based violence against women and girls in Angus. And I would just, would like to reiterate to members today that the partnership itself works very closely with all those partners. There's a great attendance at meetings on the partnership from all of the partners that I've mentioned and others, Women's Aid, RASAC and a host of others. So I think we've got a really good basis for taking forward some of the key work around prevention and education, some of which has been touched on today already, as well as the enforcement aspect of it, which Police Scotland take forward. So I think we've got a really good basis moving forward in terms of gender-based violence. But as you'll have noted in the report, I think we still have a number of challenges ahead, which we're working on, and I think we continue to make progress. Excuse me. I think one of the statistics in the report that members no doubt will about is the fact that it shows that for the period we're talking about, the total number of domestic abuse incidents in Angus had risen by 12%, which is very much a concern. And I'll just come back to maybe the reasons for that in a second. But I think it was encouraging that when Chief Inspector Fitzgerald gave us update earlier on, that the Q1 statistics for domestic abuse incidents in Angus had shown a positive reduction. So the figures that are in this report are somewhat historical, and I think it's really good to note that perhaps that there is perhaps a decline now. We're now seeing a decline in the number of incidents being reported, and I would like to think that that's got something to do with the preventative work that we're undertaking as a partnership, and also the education initiatives, again, some of which we've touched on today, and I'll talk about further. So that statistic of 12% increase, hopefully, as we've gone through the work that we're undertaking as a partnership, hopefully we're seeing some fruition to reducing that number. I've talked about the increase there, and I've no doubt members are asking why would that be the case. I think it's probably a number of different reasons. I think there's a greater public awareness now of the violence against women and young girls, and how people can report it, how they can safely report it, and how they may have more confidence when they report incidents or crimes to Police Scotland and or other partners. I think the feeling that I get when I speak to specialist services is that victims feel now they'll be listened to, believed, and supported, and whether that's by the statutory agencies or whether that's by the specialist services or a combination of all. I also think that continued alcohol and substance misuse by perpetrators has had an impact on that increase. And the other point that Alison done earlier was through our learning and development, which we've expanded quite significantly in terms of within our agencies, has improved the knowledge and skills within many of the employees within those partners. And they have much more knowledge as to how incidents can be reported, how they can encourage those who are working with to report incidents, and that people are more confident in doing so. So I think there's a range of reasons why that figure had increased up to that level. Maybe we'll come back to that under some questions later on. This is the second report, and second year that I have been in the chair of the AVAP. And one of the tasks that we set ourselves was to have a new structure of subgroups, and that was to streamline our activity and to strengthen our activity. And one of my main priorities, and now that of AVAP, is to strengthen our preventative work. And so the prevention subgroup has been developed and is very active in its work. And you'll see that there is a number of examples of their work set out in the report. Just picking out some 16 days of action, which highlights many of the proactive aspects of education and prevention. That has been continuous, been ongoing in Angus now for a number of years, and the planning for this year, which kicks off on the 25th November, I've had a summary of what's been planned, and the work there, the work that goes into actually preparing all that and delivering on different presentations, etc., is quite significant. Nevertheless, all of the partners are contributing to that, and I think it's looking really positive for this year. The white ribbon status, we've not quite reached that yet, but I'm advised by those on that we are almost got national status for that. We've got a wee bit more work to go, but we're getting there. Engaging with young people, we have and we continue to undertake a significant amount of prevention work within schools. We've just embarked on some further work, which hopefully I'll be able to report on at the next time I present to you. But there's already a very significant amount of work going on in schools to advise both males and females about gender-based violence, but also about some of the issues that were described in what Phil described as when he explained the Imagine a Man initiative that's ongoing. And it's about encouraging the positive attitudes, the behaviours, attitudes and language that that males use or shouldn't use. And it's about informing them and encouraging them to be basically have a much more positive attitude to women and young girls. So there's lots of work going on there, and we were slightly not in the right place in terms of Dundee and Angus College. When this report was written, we didn't have a representative from the college on the. Now we do. We've got the student services manager from Dundee and Angus College working along with us, and that is enabling us to assist with any preventative and educational work that we can help there with, and they're also providing some information back to us about current issues and trends. So that's been a very positive development for. I've touched on workforce learning and development already, and it's really, really important that all our partners within AVAP formed on best practice, current trends, trauma that we've talked about, pornography, and domestic abuse legislation. It's really important that we provide people with that information and learning, so that when they are dealing with victims and families, that they can advise and help them as much as possible, knowing that they've got the relevant knowledge. The online, as Chief Inspector Fitzgerald touched on earlier on, around about sextortion, etc. We've a number of sessions with staff presented by Razak, bringing us all up to date with some of the developing trends that are ongoing. Some of the stuff I don't consider myself to be naive, but when I hear some of the things that go on and people are and how they're being exploited, it is really, really quite concerning, and it changes on a daily basis. So we've had some presentations by Razak to quite a number of staff across all the partnerships so that we can understand what some of the victims are experiencing and how we can probably try and prevent some of that. Although, as the Chief Inspector mentioned, it's sometimes quite difficult to identify perpetrators. Nevertheless, the learning and development aspect of the work is really, really important, and we need to continue to focus on that as we've done during this reporting period. Data has been mentioned in some of the other presentations, and one of the shortfalls that I discovered when I came onto this post was that we didn't really have a data set that we could rely upon or refer to within Angus, and comparing ourselves against the national position. Yes, we'll have that headline figure and the figure that the police provided today, but we need to drill down a bit more. So we've set up our self-evaluation and continuous improvement subgroup, and they are now, since this report was written, have brought together a data set which we are now working on and refining. So again, by the next time I report back to this group, we will have much more detailed data, which I think you will find quite interesting, and be able to, it also enables partnership to respond accordingly in terms of where our priorities should be forward. So data is something that we're still working on, but we are getting there to reassure members today that, yeah, we're making good progress on that. As you go through the report, you can see that there are a number of examples of work under the different priority areas. Well, Police Scotland, I've mentioned there in their update about the multi-agency risk assessment conferences. Just got some figures, and the numbers for Angus are actually fairly low. But one of the more important statistics is that the number of repeat cases going to Marrax is very, very low in Angus in comparison with those in the other two areas of Tayside. So that tells me that the interventions that are being made as a result of the Marrax conferences are effective, and that we're dealing with the issues, reducing and mitigating the risks that are being presented at these meetings. So whilst that's not reflected in this report, that's an update for you on recent statistics. NHS Tayside have significantly improved the input they have to the Angus Violence Against Women Partnership. They're now fully represented on the partnership. We've got a dedicated advisor, and I think so that some of the increase in the report and the incidents that I mentioned earlier on have probably been because we get an awful lot more referrals now coming from the different areas of NHS Tayside. They've been involved in a lot of the learning and development that I've already talked about, and they've had all sorts of briefings from the advisor into different aspects of NHS, so whether that's health visitors, A&E staff, etc., and we're now seeing a much greater input from NHS into helping victims, helping them report to either the statutory agencies and/or the specialist services. White Ribbon Campaign already mentioned, and There are a couple of tables later on which in the report which basically cover the statistics I've already mentioned, and they also break down into sexual offences recorded in Scotland over the reporting period, as well as those in the Angus area. And for 2021 to 22, showed a slight increase from the previous year, but a decrease from the year previous to that. And from the figures that Chief Inspector provided today in terms of the reduction in rape and serious sexual offences in the first quarter of this period, hopefully that figure of 352 will be much reduced when we get to the 2022-23 and 2023-24 reporting periods. We have, as a partnership, to submit to government our progress towards our equally safe quality standards, and we pretty much 38 of the 40 of those, and the two that we didn't meet was one in relation to working and engaging with colleges and universities, and as I said earlier on, we've addressed that, so we are now meeting that standard. In terms of the funding, the other one we didn't quite meet. I think it's important, maybe members are aware of this, but the Scottish Government had commissioned an independent review of funding commissioning of violence against women services, and that report's now been prepared and is in the hands of Scottish Government and COSLA. And there are a number of recommendations which Government and COSLA will respond to, I understand, by the end of this year, which may see a complete change in how commissioning and funding arrangements will be in future, probably starting in 24-25. So I think there's quite a bit of work ongoing as to how specialist services will be funded over the coming years, which I think is a really positive step forward. So if that happens, we're not far away from meeting the 40 standards, which I think is excellent. Strengths and challenges, well, I think we've probably covered a few of the strengths there. I think the challenges going forward for us are risks from sexual exploitation, particularly online sexual exploitation in various shapes and forms, which the impact of that on victims should never, ever be underestimated. I mean, Chief Inspector gave you a wee description earlier on about sextortion, and the impact that has on victims, but also their families, is very, very significant, and it can last for a long period of time. That, as I've said earlier on, the different ways and methods that people try to exploit victims just continues and continues, and that is where the education aspect and preventative aspect of our work is really important, and trying to advise individuals not to become involved in that type of activity. The limited data collection was a challenge. I think we're getting there now on that. So there are a number of challenges going forward, but I'm really happy, and I can assure members that the amount of work and time that all members of AVAP, but not just the AVAP members, but the people working in those organisations, the amount of work and dedication that they put in to try and reduce the amount of gender-based violence in Angus, but also to support the victims who have unfortunately been victims of this type of crime. I think the amount of work it goes into is very, very significant. The attendance at the committee is really excellent. We'll have some really good discussions about how we can continue to evolve the work across the partnership, and this kind of work that will not be successful unless we continue to do it in partnership with each other. You've heard the police talking today, fire service, Child Protection Committee. I also chair the Adult Protection Committee, and along with Women's Aid, RASAC, victim support, everybody's got to work together here. And I think we are. I think the next time I report to you, I think we'll see a good difference in the figures and the numbers. But this is something that we can just say, right, we've got to a point now we can ease off the pedal. We should not be easing off the pedal. We need to start, because this type of criminality, unfortunately, is not going to go away. So I would want to end on a positive note that I know that 12% increase doesn't not sit well with any of us, but I think we're getting there, and hopefully the reduction that's been reported today in the last 3 months is an indication that some of the preventative and educational work that we're trying to do, not just in schools and colleges, but elsewhere as well, is paying some dividend in us going forward. So we'll just leave it at that, Convener, and happy to take any questions or observations.
Thank you very much, Ewan, for a very detailed and comprehensive presentation. We'll go to questions. Councillor Bells first. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Ewan. You know I scrutinise this at some depth, but when you look at the 3 annual reports and the police and fire and rescue reports, if you were reading those cold, you would think that Angus is possibly quite a scary place to live if you're a woman or a child. But I hope anyone watching this would take some comfort from the deepening level of partnership that we see year upon year in this. And for me, it's like a safety net, and the holes in the mesh are getting smaller, so there's less risk of anyone falling through those gaps. That's a real sense I get, and the genuine, sincere passion people have around all of these partnerships, around making lives better for women and children and people with vulnerabilities. So I hope everyone takes that away. So for me, the area, priority area that needs greatest investment and attention is number 4, which you've already reflected, I think, around the White Ribbon campaign. I know that 8 people were trained. I just wondered how many people that they were able to reach, if you had any idea around that. And I wondered as well if the Emily test is the campaign that will be used in the further education setting, because I know the work that Laura Winter did last year for the 16 Days campaign, that was a major part of the discussion with Angus Women's Aid. It was incredibly powerful, terribly upsetting, but it seems like a really valuable piece of work that we could use locally, and any ideas that come up around how that word around positive role modelling for boys and men. I'm going to sign up our group, the guys in our group. I'm sure they'd be keen to support that. But it is a job for everybody, I think, across the communities. It's such an important piece of work, and if we get it right, everyone wins. And I know the challenges there are around that positive role modelling when there are influencers online who are giving out the exact opposite message. It's awful what is available online. So thank you for all the work that's gone on in the partnership on this. Thanks.
To answer your question on Councillor, I don't have that at hand, but I will speak to Laura and we'll get that sent off to you as soon as we can. In terms of the Emily test that you mentioned there, that is going to feature again in the 16 Days of Action. It is very, very powerful, and so we're not just going to, bring it and then just forget about it. We're going to continue that and use the themes in that to try and develop out our prevention priority as we go forward. And I'll probably, when we send you the details on the numbers, maybe just give you a wee bit more information on that as well. But listen, thanks for your positive comments there. I mean, I think that would be really well appreciated by the partners and the people who are working at the front end of this pretty difficult work. I see it, and I'm sure you do yourself, that you know, everybody is really committed to trying to get on top of this, of gender-based violence. And as I say, we've got a bit to go, but we've got our foot on the pedal, and I think we're all working together, and the partnership aspect of it is key to success.
Thank you. Councillor Dorn, a question?
Yep, thank you. I'm glad you touched on the training around kind of web or kind of online crimes in this area as well. It looked from the statistics that that's still a small amount of what's covered in the area, but from stats I've seen across the country and kind of changing stats, it looks like it's obviously going to be something that's going to be rising. So it would be good to hear more about that in the future and what the situation is in Angus. I didn't want to ask any further question on it at this point. The other question was relating to the page 117 of the combined papers that we have, which is relating to the update from the Women's Rape and Sexual Abuse Centre, where it states that women are waiting 5 to 6 months for support. And I just wondered about the impact of that. And it sounds as if it's relating to staffing and recruitment, and if there's anything can be done to support that, because it seems quite a long period of time for people having to wait for additional support when something like this has happened.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. In relation to that timescale, my understanding from RASAC is that since this reporting period, that has reduced, and they do now have a dedicated staff member in Angus, and so I think the timescale for wait has reduced. I can get a more up-to-date figure for you, and we'll get that sent to you. I speak to RASAC fairly regularly, and they are a pretty good barometer of what's actually happening. Going back to your first point about online activity, from that chart you can see that the figures of issues that are reported to them, not all of those turn into reported crimes, because some of the people they are working with do not wish to formally report. And I think some of that in relation to online activity is because of the embarrassment factor, don't to know, etc., etc. So, they're not, but from the presentations they gave and the different ways and different platforms that these offenders are using, it just develops, I don't say day on day, but certainly develops regularly. And, it's when they gave that presentation, 2 or 3 of the presentations actually to staff, most staff who were pretty experienced across all the partners were, well, never knew about this, never knew about that, how does this work and how does that work? So we need to continue to evolve that information sharing and or training in terms of an awareness raising as to what some people are, how they're being impacted upon. So yeah, we've very much got that in our minds, and I shall come back to you with the current waiting times for RASAC and support.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Speed.
Thanks. Good afternoon, convener. Thank you, Mr. West, for the commentary along with the report. A few years ago, along actually with Councillor Fotheringham, I signed up to the Chartered Institute of Housing's campaign and pledged to the Make a Stance policy. There's reference made to that within the report. However, we know that there is an ongoing housing crisis and shortage, including that of temporary accommodation, which is often key, especially in emergency situations. How much does this supply issue have on children and families who are needing to urgently flee to safety, or who come to a place where they feel ready to leave the perpetrators? How much does this supply issue have on this area of business?
Well, in terms of the actual figures and the number of people fall into that category, Councillor, I wouldn't have that, but I can get it from Housing But what I can say is that, as it's pointed out in the report, Housing Department, the Council, now have the Rapid Rehousing Transition Plan in place. So that will prioritise any woman who's experiencing domestic abuse to get access, either initially temporary accommodation, and then more settled accommodation as time moves on. Now, my understanding is that when such a circumstance is reported to the Housing Department, they work with other partners involved to make sure that nobody is left in a homeless situation who is the subject of gender-based violence. I've not heard, and certainly not been reported to me, that there's been any issues around that. And I would have thought that would have come to the AVAC quarterly meetings. It's not been reported, so I'm assuming, therefore, that it's not a particular issue in Angus, but I will ask our housing representative, and we can come back to you with a response. It's certainly not been something that's been reported as a feature at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Mr. West. Thank you. Thanks, convener.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? No. Comments? Okay, then we have, this report will also go to Angus Council as well in the future. Do we agree with this report? Thank you very much, Mr. West. It was very detailed and you're all doing a fantastic job. So thank you.
Thank you, Convener.
Now, I'll get it right this time. This is our Chief Social Work Officer's report, now agenda item number 8. Thank you.
Much appreciated, Convener. Thank you for that. Colleagues, I am acutely aware of the time that we've spent this afternoon already exploring in a lot of detail some cross-cutting themes that you will also recognise in my report. So you'll be pleased to know I don't intend to go over the detail of those areas. I do appreciate the opportunity just to do a brief introduction, though, to this, my annual Chief Social Work Officer report, which you'll note covers all aspects of social work and social care services that are delivered by and also on behalf of Angus Council, and that includes those that are delivered in the Health and Social Care Partnership and overseen through the Integration Joint Board. Reflecting that complex governance arrangement for social work and social care, following today's discussion and consideration by yourselves, the report will also call at full council for approval and thereafter will be presented to the Integration Joint Board before being submitted also as part of that process to Scottish Government. So I make no apologies for some of you get this report on at least 3 of those occasions. The report relates to the last financial year, just closed off there in March, and it gives a flavour of a wide range of activity being undertaken across social work and social care services in Angus. Members will see that I've acknowledged the operational, financial, legislative and policy contexts, that these do remain pressurised with rising demand and rising complexity evidenced across the majority of social work and social care service areas. The reality of constrained budgets, given our public sector financial position, challenges around workforce availability more broadly, and the ongoing pressure of significant and legal change across the sector. So these services are being delivered in that context, that reality. Some trends that members may wish to note in particular include the positive outcome of our joint multi-protection inspection, which has been subject of separate reporting, and that reflected in particular for today's purposes a strong culture and compassionate social work practice, of which I'm very proud. A continued and significant increase in adult protection referrals is also noted in the report, and an increase in the number of families requiring children's social work intervention and an increase in the number of children on the Child Protection Register. There's also a range of pressures impacting on the availability of resources to support looked after children, which was the subject of a special report to Policy and Resources Committee in December last year. I'm pleased to note the high performance in relation to delayed discharge measures across our Health and Social Care Partnership, but this is also held alongside a continued and a significant level of unmet need, which I know that the Integration Joint Board is also paying close attention to, and that's in relation to access to care at home in the community. And there's also a specific note there just to flag, because it's a very specific statutory function for the Council, the demand for mental health officer services, and that's across the lifespan. Once again, I'd like to take this opportunity to commend our workforce, your workforce, both the paid and unpaid carers, of course, for their commitment and their dedication to supporting those who need it in Angus. And I'm particularly pleased today to be joined by my colleague John Cooper, who will be present along with me to take any questions you may have. John has just joined the Health and Social Care Partnership as the Head of Service with a portfolio lead for social work services. So I'm pleased to be joined by John today. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Councillor Devine. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. I want to echo our gratitude to the staff across all the areas that they work in. Their resilience has been amazing. And also for those that have recently joined, I want to welcome them and John. Thank you for choosing Angus to work in. Before I've got three questions, but just other thing, I wanted to add very quickly my congratulations to ADARS on their achievement against overall increase in need. They've surpassed the national target for people receiving treatment within 21 days in the last 3 quarters, which I think is something to be commended. On page 146, it would seem that there's a lack of options available for people to make best use of their package of care. Could you give examples of the options that are lacking? That's one question. Timeline on Gables, maybe, as well. And is there any update from the pilot of engagement with perpetrators of domestic abuse? I think the pilot finished just a couple of months ago. It'd be good to get some update on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I will answer the question first of all about the domestic abuse perpetrator work, and that will give my colleague just a moment to settle himself into position. So you're quite right, the domestic abuse pilot, which is referenced on page 6, I think, of the report for those who are looking for it, has been a very helpful piece of work, thwarted by a lack of capacity to deliver in the way that we would like to. So we are learning some of the lessons around how we can better support frontline staff to make the most of that opportunity alongside their other responsibilities, and that is quite a challenge in terms of delivering some programmed intervention alongside responding to what can sometimes be quite a chaotic presenting situation for a family that needs immediate support in a very practical sense. So this is related to our work and the commitment that you've heard in a couple of the reports so far today around rolling out our Safe and Together model and approach. We have been doing quite a lot of good work with our justice social work services and helping upskill children and family staff in having what are very difficult conversations with adult males in relation to their behaviour towards women, and obviously the impact that that has within a family context in relation to children in that household or within that family too. So we've not had as much impact across as many families as we would have liked with that, but the learning from the approach is where we've been able to do that consistently over a period of time. There's some success there to be had, and I think that that's definitely something we'll continue to look to explore, how we support people to deliver that in a much more consistent way. The other linkage, of course, and you'll have seen that in our report as well, to our Involving Dads work, which is part of our kind of wider integrated children's services partnership work. around just how we kind of work with dads in the context that they find themselves in, whether they're part of the family group within a household or whether they are part of the family group in a different context, and how we really kind of make good use of dad's learning and dad's experience to help us to understand how we can intervene more effectively with dads as part of a family group, not just in relation to domestic abuse, of course, across the whole range of work that we would do in social work and child protection, and of course beyond that in terms of just family support. So at this stage I'm going to hand over to John in relation to your query around the self-directed support and in particular the Gables. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Councillor Devine, for your question. Of self-directed support, as you'll see in the paper, there are 4 options available for citizens in Angus, and I think what's actually healthy to note in there before I seek to answer your question, we do have a good number of those who are seeking an option 1 payment. That's often a percentage, albeit it is 9% here, and some authorities that could be much lower. So I think there's good evidence to support individuals to try and secure their own packages where appropriate to do so. However, as is noted within the report, challenges do remain in securing that variety of options. Actions that are currently undertaken are looking at our commissioning strategy to try and ensure that there is that variety of support. Obviously, I'm new to Angus, recognise some of the geographical challenges, particularly in the rural areas, and that is no doubt a significant factor in terms of package of care availability, particularly those that are commissioned in the private sector. So alongside this, it's also looking at our own internal resources too, to see what flexibility we can offer to try and particularly meet those issues, those needs in areas where there has historically been challenges to find those supports. So that is something that I'm interested in looking at. Obviously new in post, I think there's room for improvement. There's room there to look and see how we can do things differently. Commissioning framework development will seek to address that particular issue. Hopefully that answers your question. Happy to move on to the next one, which is obviously in respect of the Gables. So I did seek an update on this prior to today's meeting. The 8 residents that are currently within the Gables will be moving to Beach Hill House. The update on that is that this is an ongoing process, but the wheels are very much in motion. It's being done at a time and a pace that reflects the needs of those individuals that are currently residing in the Gables, but their move to Beach Hill House is in progress. So that's the real-time update I have for today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Shepherd.
Excuse me, sorry, Martin. Could you put your speaker on, please?
Did you catch that?
Yes.
Yeah. Not having luck with that microphone today. So on that point, the 20% of children being in poverty in Angus, and that was before the cost of living crisis. And then there's a quote here, I'll take it from the report: "We are likely to continue to experience an increase in the complexity of care needs, resulting in higher demand for intensive packages of support and enhanced workforce skills." So, we're already at that 20% figure, and there's strains identified in the report, and I just want really a comment and a bit of feedback on where you think we're going with this, and maybe at a national level out with the council. And do you think the fund is adequate to deal with some of the issues we face at Angus? It's clear to see that some of the effects of austerity are definitely felt in Angus from the reading in the report. But on that note as well, I want to reiterate that the hard work that is done to counter a lot of the things there, like they've been highlighted in the showcases of work, that informed councillors are the great. So what I'm saying is if people weren't putting in the extra effort in Angus, these figures would be even worse. So I'm very aware that a lot of work goes in from the staff and from the teams to counter these figures, but I just think I have to highlight what I'm reading in the report to get that out there, that it's a bit of a crisis, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question, which for those who were unable to hear and online related largely to the demographic area of the report, which is on page 138 and references the kind of wider context around child poverty in Angus and the underpinning levels of need that we're seeing, but also the ageing demographic that Angus has and is as well kind of exercised certainly in relation to integration joint board strategic planning and the impact that those things have in terms of the increase in the volume of individuals and families presenting with multiple and complex needs and or coexisting conditions that then result in a higher demand for social work and social care services and generally create pressures within the system. I think it is fair to say that the impact of child poverty and poverty in general has been well surfaced in our context locally and nationally. There are action plans in place at national and local level to take steps to address that, but we are obviously also living in a cost of living crisis, which is also referred to in the report, and the reality is that we expect that together with the demographic shifts that we are seeing will result in continued increase in demand for social work services and provision, both assessment and interventions. And of course we're then therefore grateful to be part of the wider partnership approach in Angus to addressing as far as we can on a local level the issues that are sitting beneath in terms of employability and our economic kind of vibrancy in Angus, part of the wider integrated children's services planning approach, which is pan Tayside and learning from our neighbouring authorities. I don't know, John, whether or not there's anything in particular in relation to the ageing profile of our demographic in Angus that you would particularly like to focus on, because I know that is an area of significant kind of interest within the partnership because of the increased level of need and then therefore the demand for services, when what we are seeking to achieve is for people to stay at home in communities for as long as possible and to live life well in that context. That becomes more demanding when you've got an ageing population. If patients' complex needs are not managed carefully, it can result in a greater demand for in-house and medical intervention and or care at home, care home provision. So John, I'll hand over to yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Absolutely. I think within the report under performance and data summary for adult services and capacity and demand, you can see the significant number of hours that are delivered in respect of personal care. On a weekly basis, upwards of 12,000 hours per week. It's no mean feat to achieve this on a weekly basis. The level of unmet need for care at home is a concern, and there is a piece of work being carried out, being led by myself, which is to look at every single individual that is on our unmet need list at this point in time. Part of this is also reviewing our eligibility criteria in the partnership too, and ensuring that we have equity and consistency in terms of how that eligibility criteria is put into practice within the social work teams across the communities. The hope is that we can ensure, therefore, that we have those with the most significant needs are met, those with the lower level needs, that there is signposting guidance and appropriate support and services that are made available for those individuals at that lower level need. So it is an area, Catherine, you're absolutely right to highlight it, of concern for the partnership, but it's an area that we're currently taking action on, particularly in respect of those unmet needs going forward.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dorn, a question.
Oh, I think Councillor Proctor was before me. Just
my apologies, I can't see the actual numbers. Councillor Proctor.
Thank you very much, Convener. Thank you very much, Councillor Doran. Yeah, the question I've got, Catherine, and I'd just like to thank you and your team for the excellent report and for all the work you do. But the question I've got there is down about page 150 at page 151. And it really deals with the increase in the number of young carers from 154 from 1921-22 to 172 in 22-23. And then it goes on to say across Angus schools, primary and secondary, and at the end of March 23, the identified young carers has increased from 88 to 99. And I just wonder if there's a reason, if there's a you know, something in the background that's causing this increase. Because it clearly, being a carer, a young carer, must have a great impact on a young person's education. I fully well know this because I was a young carer for my mother, though you never turned, is that way back in the distant days up until the time she died, a very young woman. So is there any indication of why this increase is coming about? Thank you.
Councillor Proctor, thank you very much for that question and for highlighting really this part of the report, a really important part of the report, which is about our carer support services across Angus, and we're really well served by Angus Carer Centre in relation to the support that they provide. I think the reason behind the uplift is that we've been doing a significant amount of work alongside Angus Carers to increase the profile and the awareness of children as carers. I know that they've been engaged in quite a significant re-evaluation of their approach and their strategic plan, and myself and a number of other people on the call today were part of some of the sessions earlier in the summer. They are very keen to get much more into the space of supporting children and young people, including those who are younger than their current target age range. And I think it's not so much that there are more children who are caring, but we are getting better at identifying them and making sure that they're visible within services and that there's an understanding of the additional support that they may require, both in relation to school and home life and other activities. And just having an identity as a young carer, but also as a young person, separate to those adults that they are providing support and care for. But the reality is that in a context where we are seeing a higher number of families being referred into social work services, a higher number of people accessing mental health services and substance misuse services, lying underneath that is likely to be an increase in the number of young people who are living in a household where adults are receiving support themselves for their own needs. And I think that we can expect that this area of demand will also increase, both because of an increase in demand, but also at that increase of awareness and appropriate targeting of support and services.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you.
Councillor Doran.
Okay, thank you. So it's really important that it's highlighted that an area like Angus, which is relatively low levels of deprivation, but still has over 20% of children who are living in poverty, and the 51% increase in the number of referrals to the Angus Welfare Rights team as well. And as others have said, demonstrates how the past few years have impacted on people, and the demands on the services are likely only to increase over time. Great to hear about that project, looking at to see how big the gap is between the demand and delivery, because I wanted to ask a little bit more about that, because that's important for us as councillors when we're obviously making decisions about support in different areas. But I wanted to focus on this question around staff, as that seems to be one of the areas of challenge, and the report doesn't cover this in much detail, but around have you got the funding to support the staff to match the demand, or is it kind of related to staff turnover and change, or is it a challenge just to recruit people into these spaces? So I'm just kind of asking a little bit more around that, as that seems to be the challenging point to deliver more services in this area. And obviously the current staff are delivering beyond expectations, which is fantastic, but people can only work under circumstances like that for limited periods of time because it becomes stressful for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Doran, for that question and for bringing the focus to staff who are obviously critical in delivering the services that we do day in and day out, and for 24/7, 365 days a year. And I think what you've touched on there is really important. This report is complemented by the workforce planning report, both for the local authority, but also within the partnership. And I think you would find similar kind of themes across all of the areas of business. But in relation to social work and social care, there are two quite distinct and separate issues. The social care workforce is a very, very competitive environment. There's been significant growth and demand, as you've seen in our report, for people with a particular skill set and a particular interest to undertake critical work, direct delivery work, providing that kind of personal care and intensive care and support in people's own homes. We are in a workforce kind of demand situation where we're also competing with other organisations that deliver a different kind of work-life balance, and the remuneration is competitive. We are all looking for the same people in quite a small pool. So it's a challenge when the budgets are also under pressure to then be able to do anything very significant and different around that. In relation to the kind of wider social work workforce, the challenge is somewhat different. We have a national issue in terms of the number of social workers who are being trained and coming through as qualified individuals, and we're also seeding a number of experienced social workers from the workforce. And so you see not only a reduction in the number of people within the workforce over a period of time, but also the balance of the level of experience within that workforce is also changing. And that is resulting in greater pressure in terms of supervisory level posts, managerial posts, in terms of that oversight of the practice, that increased demand that you've seen being managed and supported by the same number of people, but with between them a collective reduction in the number of years experience. So it's quite a different context in terms of looking at the workforce profile in Angus that we see. It's impacted by that wider picture and the availability of staff and our ability to be competitive at a local level in terms of our salary grading scales and the range of opportunities that we have for staff. That said, our current workforce are engaging with us really positively, and I would think it's fair to say, view Angus as a good place to be a social worker, and are proud to work in Angus. And I would say our social work and social care staff certainly conduct themselves in a way that suggests that that is the case. But you are right, it is difficult to do that for an infinite period of time without an injection of additionality or additional recognition. And we're continually working to look to see how we can deliver that, how we can attract staff in, how we can retain the staff that we've got, how we look at job enrichment and how we create opportunities for people around career progression and development that helps to retain them within Angus Council. And we're very lucky to have the opportunity to cross-fertilise in terms of giving people the opportunity to step into the partnership and experience a different kind of profile of work and back into children, families and justice, and kind of look at how we create that sense of opportunity and change without necessarily losing that workforce into another organisational construct altogether or a different local authority area. So it is a very challenging staffing and workforce situation across both social work and social care, but also in the wider health and social care partnership too. This is not just an issue that is affecting one profession, it's affecting all professions and particularly caring professions at this moment in time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Speed.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Yeah, I think it's a hugely worrying picture. And I guess my question is pretty similar and follows on from Councillor Doran's and also Catherine's response. But as a result of the growing need and demand across children and adult services, alongside those workforce challenges and budget issues, how much of an impact does this have on, in particular, probably our social workers and, you know, those social work values and the ethos of, you know, promoting social justice and human rights versus what could now be said as just being, you know, gatekeepers of our budgets? You know, how much, you know, do staff raise this as an issue, perhaps when they've gone through their university degree? It's maybe painted a different picture really around what social work is all about, compared to actually in reality now what they're actually able to do. So yeah, how much of a risk is this in terms of ultimately upholding the rights of our residents, both children and adults, staff retention, which I know you've touched on there, but yeah, ultimately improving the outcomes across a range of areas within Angus?
Thank you very much, Councillor Speed. Interesting and in some ways philosophical question that I could talk about for some time. I think you hit on the reality of experience and feedback that I remember as a newly qualified social worker some 23 years ago. You know, that reality of what it means to deliver social work within any organisational construct is different than perhaps your more idealised kind of hope around what that looks like. And I know that operating within a local authority context, that kind of statutory social work provision brings with it a huge richness in terms of the opportunity of work to make a real difference with people and their lives. But it also comes with a challenge because there are limitations both in terms of the role and the scope of the role, but also in relation to the financial resources that are available and the other types of resources that are available within any local area. So this speaks to the challenges around local authority budgets, and our own budget setting process internally has tried to take that into account on numerous occasions and has done so. But the reality is that, you know, if we wanted to do the kind of most wonderful social work, the resourcing would look vastly different than it does now. You know, if I was being aspirational, we're looking at very, very small caseloads to be able to give people the kind of person-centred, very individualised attention that people would want of an absolutely top-level provision. And that is not the reality of public service financing right now. You're right, there are significant increases in the demand on staff's time, and what we ask staff to do and what we ask our managers to do on our collective behalf is make choices about what is the priority. And sometimes what that will mean is cases that might have been a priority 5 years ago are no longer the priority now. And so what you see is a targeting of the resources that the council has available at its disposal through the lens of people who are looking at the whole portfolio of need being referred in at one point in time. So it would be wrong of me to sit and say that there is no consequence. There's a consequence both in relation to individual staff taking on a greater level of caseload responsibility than might have been the case a couple of years ago. There is also a difference that you would see over a period of time, although it's very difficult to evidence that in relation to the overall threshold of need. But what we can see is that where children are presenting in relation to that kind of top end of child protection need, and similarly in relation to adult services, we are good in terms of our recognition and our response to those levels of cases where there is a statutory threshold for the council to intervene. The broader kind of perspective around how we meet needs more generally in the community is how we're working with our wider partners in the voluntary sector and beyond in terms of supporting that kind of wider intervention in communities. And that's not without its challenges, but we do have a lot of strength to play on in terms of Angus's connections. We've got a very who are working well with us to support our engagement both with children and families, but also with our adult services in the Health and Social Care Partnership. So I hope that goes some way, Councillor Speed, to answering your question. I know it's probably not as clear cut as you might have found helpful, but it is a really complex and, as I said at the start, quite a philosophical debate about the extent to which statutory social work provision should be involved in that kind of much more nuanced picture. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Any further questions? Comments? No, we've got the recommendations then. Is the report agreed? Thank you.
Convener, sorry, we're about to reach the 3-hour mark, so we are required to set aside standing orders if the committee agree.
Convener, we've 10 agendas to go through yet, and give it 12 minutes on the agenda, and that's going to be 7 o'clock before we're even finished. I'm just making that point.
And I know that probably several of us will have other meetings. I don't think I'm going to get to my other one now, but I need advice then, Mrs. Buchanan, what our options are.
Convener, your options are to suspend the meeting and continue it at another time, and we would need to just rearrange that. Your second option is to continue, but set a time frame for doing that. And your third option is just to continue until the agenda is complete. I guess usually for yourself and maybe following consultation with the members.
I think we'll need a recess. So we'll have a wee break to get a glass of water and a refreshment or something, because it is 3 hours now, isn't it?
We'll recess and then we'll come back with a decision.
Okay. 10 minutes? 5? 5, okay. Thank you. 5-minute recess.
We're now live, Convener.
Thank you very much, Mrs Whitted. Members, in view of the fact that this meeting has gone on for just a little over 3 hours and we still have half the agenda to complete and discuss, in terms of Standing Order 21, I'm going to move that this meeting is now adjourned and it is reconvened at a mutually agreed date once we have spoken to yourselves and the committee members, services staff. Can I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Okay, is that agreed? Okay, thank you very much, and apologies for not getting through it all, but there was a lot of very detailed annual reports that came forward, and we'll deal with what's remaining of the agenda at the next meeting. So thank you for your attendance.